Hey everyone, welcome back to another round of Minecraft parkour and Reddit chaos. Today's collection hits different because we're diving into something truly unsettling. What happens when people think you can't hear them, can't respond, and can't fight back? The audacity is breathtaking, honestly. Before we jump in, I just want to give a huge shout out to everyone who's been commenting and showing love on the channel. You're genuinely the reason this keeps going, and I appreciate you more than you know. So our first story takes us into Sarah's world. She's 34, lying in a coma after a brutal car accident, and everyone thinks she's gone. Her husband complains about medical bills, her best friend asks if he's dating yet. Her own mother worries about her ruined retirement plans. But here's the thing nobody knew. Sarah could hear absolutely everything. 3 months ago, my entire life changed in the span of about 4 seconds. That's how long it took for a distracted driver to run a red light and T-bone my sedan on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember the impact, the sound of metal crunching, and then nothing. Just darkness. The doctors told my family I might never wake up. Severe traumatic brain injury, they said. Induced coma to reduce swelling. Wait and see. Those were the words that defined my existence for the next 14 weeks. But here's the thing nobody knew. The thing that makes this whole situation so much worse than anyone could imagine. I could hear everything. Every single word. I was trapped inside my own body, completely aware, completely conscious, just unable to move or speak or open my eyes. It's called covert consciousness, and it's apparently rare enough that most medical staff don't even test for it. So while everyone stood around my bed discussing my prognosis like I was already gone, I was right there, cataloguing every conversation, every comment, every casual cruelty they thought I'd never know about. My husband Mark visited exactly twice in the first month. I know because I counted the days between his voice appearing in my room. The first time he stayed maybe 20 minutes. I heard him pull up a chair, heard the rustle of his jacket, and then he just started talking, but not to me. He was on the phone with someone, maybe his brother, complaining about being stuck with my medical bills. He actually used those words, stuck with them, like I'd chosen to get hit by a car. Like I'd personally decided to inconvenience him with the audacity of requiring life-saving medical care. He talked about how our insurance wasn't covering everything, how he'd have to dip into our savings, how this was going to set back his plans to buy a new truck. A truck. I was lying there fighting for my life, and this man was worried about a vehicle upgrade. The second visit was worse. He brought my best friend Jennifer with him, and I remember feeling this tiny surge of something like hope when I heard her voice. Jennifer and I had been friends since college. We'd been in each other's weddings, our kids had playdates every week. Surely she'd be different. Surely she'd sit with me, talk to me, treat me like I was still a person. She stayed for 10 minutes. I know because the wall clock in my room had a loud tick, and I'd gotten very good at counting time. 10 minutes of small talk with Mark about traffic and weather, and then I heard her voice drop to that conspiratorial whisper people use when they think they're being discreet. She asked him if he'd started dating yet, not if he was okay, not if he needed support, not if there was anything she could do to help with my kids. She asked if he was dating, and Mark, my husband of 9 years, the father of my children, he laughed. He actually laughed and said it was too soon, but he appreciated her thinking of him. I would have vomited if I could have moved. My mother visited more frequently, which I initially took as a sign of actual maternal concern. I was wrong. She cried every time. These big dramatic sobs that the nurses probably found very moving. But I heard what she said through the tears. She cried about how my condition was ruining her retirement plans. She and my father had been planning to sell their house and buy an RV, travel the country, finally enjoy their golden years. But now she had to help with my two kids, since Mark was apparently too overwhelmed to handle parenting alone. Never mind that these were her grandchildren. Never mind that my 7-year-old daughter and 5-year-old son were probably terrified and confused about why mommy wasn't coming home. No, the real tragedy was that Grandma might have to postpone her road trip. This is where it gets absurd. Week 5, I heard my mother on the phone in my room, talking to her sister. She was complaining about the financial burden, about how, if I didn't wake up soon, they'd have to make some hard decisions. Hard decisions. I was a hard decision now. She talked about quality of life, about whether it was fair to keep me on life support indefinitely. about how maybe it would be better for everyone if they just let nature take its course. I was screaming inside, screaming, begging her to stop, to fight for me, to give me more time. But all that came out was the steady beep of my heart monitor. The nurses were the only bright spot in this nightmare. They talked to me like I was a person. They'd come in and narrate what they were doing, tell me about their day, update me on hospital gossip. There was one nurse, Patricia, who'd sit with me during her breaks and read celebrity magazines out loud. She said even if I couldn't hear her, even if I was completely gone, she believed in treating every patient with dignity. I wanted to tell her I could hear her. I wanted to tell her she was the only person keeping me sane. But I couldn't. I could only listen and hope and wait. Then came the breaking point. Week 8. My husband brought someone to my room, a woman I didn't recognize. Her voice was young, syrupy sweet, the kind of tone that sets your teeth on edge. She kept calling him sweetie. She held his hand. I heard the sound of her bracelets jingling when she reached out to touch him. Mark introduced her to the day shift nurse as a friend from work. A friend. This friend stood at the foot of my bed and said how sad this all was, how hard it must be for poor Mark, how she admired his strength, and then I heard them kiss, right there, in my room. While I lay 3 feet away, unable to do anything but listen to my marriage dissolve in real time. I'd like to say that was rock bottom, but it wasn't. Week 10, my mother and Mark had a meeting with my neurologist in the hallway outside my room. They didn't close the door all the way. I heard the whole thing. The doctor was cautiously optimistic about some recent brain activity, some responses to stimuli that suggested I might be more aware than previously thought. He wanted to run more tests, try some different approaches. My mother asked how much those tests would cost. Mark asked how much longer they should realistically wait before discussing alternative options. Alternative options? They were already planning my exit while the doctor was telling them I might wake up. The neurologist, bless him, pushed back. He insisted they give it more time, told them that recovery timelines for brain injuries were unpredictable, that he'd seen patients wake up after months and make remarkable progress. Mark asked if remarkable progress meant I'd be back to normal. The doctor admitted probably not, that there would likely be deficits, therapy, a long recovery road. Mark went quiet for a moment and then asked about long-term care facilities, about what happens to someone who wakes up but can't really function independently. He was already warehousing me in his mind. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Week 14, day 3. I was lying there during the early morning hours, listening to the hospital wake up around me, when I felt something different. A twitch, just a tiny movement in my right index finger, but it was mine. I'd made it happen. I tried again. Another twitch. I focused every ounce of energy I had into that finger, and slowly, impossibly, I felt it curl. The motion triggered something on one of my monitors, an alarm. A nurse rushed in and I heard her call for the doctor. Within minutes, my room was full of people, and I was moving my finger repeatedly, purposefully. Morse code for help that I didn't actually know, but hoped someone would recognize as intentional. The neurologist called it miraculous, a remarkable recovery, unexpected and wonderful. He was genuinely thrilled, talking about rehabilitation and therapy, and how this was the best possible outcome they could have hoped for. I called it clarifying, because in those 14 weeks of darkness, I'd learned exactly who the people in my life really were when they thought I couldn't hear them. When they thought I couldn't judge them, when they thought there would be no consequences. I didn't tell anyone what I'd heard. Not at first, not when Mark rushed in with tears in his eyes, grabbing my hand and telling me how scared he'd been, how much he'd missed me. Not when my mother showed up with flowers and cards from my kids, sobbing about answered prayers. Not when Jennifer posted on social media about miracles and friendship, and being so blessed that I was back. I just smiled weakly, nodded when I could, and let them think they'd gotten away with it. But I was taking notes. Mental notes at first, then real ones once I could hold a pen. I started asking nurses who'd visited and when. I requested to see the visitor logs. I began recording conversations on my phone once I got it back. Just casual chats with Mark about our future. With my mother about the kids, with Jennifer about our friendship. I was building a case without anyone realizing there was a case to build. Every time Mark complained about something minor, I noted it. Every time my mother made a passive-aggressive comment about my recovery taking too long, I wrote it down. Every time Jennifer proved she'd only visited that once in 14 weeks, despite her social media performance, I documented it. Physical therapy was brutal, but it gave me time to think, to plan. The therapist said I was remarkably motivated, that my progress was exceptional. They didn't know I was fueled by something more powerful than the desire to walk again. I was fueled by the absolute clarity of knowing exactly who deserved to be in my life and who needed to be cut out like the cancer they were. My exit strategy wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about survival, about protecting myself and my kids from people who'd already shown me they couldn't be trusted with my vulnerability. 3 months after waking up, I was walking with a cane. 4 months, I was driving again. 5 months, I filed for divorce. Mark was shocked. He'd thought we were working through things, rebuilding. I handed him a folder with transcripts of every conversation I'd heard, every visitor log showing his absence, every piece of evidence of his girlfriend. His face went white. He tried to explain, to justify, to say I didn't understand the stress he'd been under. I told him I understood perfectly. I understood that when I needed him most, he'd been shopping for my replacement. My mother got a similar folder, along with a letter explaining that while I appreciated her help with the kids, I'd be making other arrangements going forward. I'd found a wonderful nanny, someone who actually wanted to spend time with my children, and I'd be limiting grandparent visits to supervised occasions only. She called me ungrateful. I called her honest feedback. Jennifer got nothing but a block on every platform and a brief text that said I knew about her one visit and her question to Mark. She tried to call 17 times. I never answered. The thing is, I'm not angry anymore. I was for a while. Furious, actually. But now I'm just grateful. Grateful that I got this gift of terrible knowledge. Grateful that I learned the truth before wasting more years on people who would abandon me the moment things got difficult. Grateful that my kids will grow up watching their mother set boundaries and demand better. Some people think I'm too harsh, that I should forgive, that everyone handles crisis differently, that I should be happy I survived and let the rest go. But you know what's even worse than being in a coma and hearing the truth? Being fully awake, completely paralyzed, and watching people plan your funeral while you're screaming inside. 6 weeks ago, I had a stroke, not the kind you recover from in a few days with some physical therapy and a new appreciation for vegetables. No, this was the kind that left me with something called locked-in syndrome. If you don't know what that is, let me paint you a picture. I was fully conscious, fully aware. I could hear every word, process every conversation, feel every emotion, but I couldn't move. Couldn't speak, couldn't even blink on command at first. I was a prisoner in my own body, and everyone around me assumed I was already gone. The first time I truly understood how bad things were, my family was gathered around my hospital bed. My father stood at the foot, arms crossed, looking at me like I was already a problem to be solved. My wife Rebecca sat in the chair to my left, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. My brother stood near the window, hands in his pockets, avoiding eye contact with anyone. And then my father said it. He said we needed to talk about quality of life decisions. Quality of life. Like I wasn't even there to have an opinion about my own life. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them I could hear every word. But my body wouldn't cooperate. I was screaming on the inside, begging them to see me, to notice that I was still in here. But nothing moved. Not my hands, not my mouth, not even my eyes in any way they could recognize. I was invisible in plain sight. My father didn't waste time. He said maybe it would be kinder to let me go. Kinder. He used that word like he was doing me a favor. He talked about how I wouldn't want to live like this, how it wasn't fair to keep me on machines, how we needed to think about what was best for everyone. Everyone, not me, everyone else. Rebecca nodded along, crying softly, and said she couldn't live like this forever. She actually said that. She said she couldn't do this, like my existence was some kind of burden she had to carry. I felt my heart shatter in a way I didn't know was possible. My brother, to his credit, pushed back at first. He said it was too soon, that the doctors hadn't given up, that maybe I just needed more time. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe someone would fight for me. Maybe someone would see that I was still here. But that wasn't even the worst part. My brother paused, glanced at Rebecca, and then asked about my life insurance policy. He asked how much it was worth. He asked who the beneficiary was, and just like that, The hope died. He wasn't defending me. He was calculating. Rebecca answered him. She said it was $500,000 and that she was the primary beneficiary. My brother nodded slowly, like he was doing mental math, and then he stopped arguing for more time. Just like that. The conversation shifted from whether I deserved a chance to live to how quickly they could move forward with ending my life. I'd never felt so alone, so betrayed, so completely erased while still breathing. There was one person, though, one person who didn't treat me like I was already dead. Her name was Claire, and she was my nurse. She worked the day shift, and from the very beginning she treated me differently. She talked to me like I could hear her. She explained everything she was doing, asked me yes or no questions, even though I couldn't answer, and she watched me. Really watched me. One afternoon she was adjusting my pillow, and she asked me a question. She said, "Marcus, if you can hear me, try to move your eyes to the left." I don't know how, but I did it. It was the smallest movement, barely noticeable, but she saw it. She saw it and she gasped. Claire immediately called for the doctor. She insisted they run more tests, that there was something there, that I wasn't as gone as everyone thought. The doctor was skeptical, but Claire wouldn't let it go. She fought for me when my own family had already written me off, and she was right. The tests showed brain activity. They showed that I was conscious, that I was aware, that I was trapped but still present. The doctors started talking about locked-in syndrome, about new approaches, about the possibility of recovery, but my family didn't seem relieved. They seemed annoyed that things were getting complicated. Things went from bad to unhinged. As the days passed, I started to regain tiny bits of movement. A finger twitch here, a slight shift in my hand there. It was agonizingly slow, but it was progress. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. Claire was thrilled, but Rebecca started spending less time at the hospital. She said it was too hard, that she needed space to process everything. I understood that, or at least I tried to. But then I heard the phone call. She was sitting in the chair next to my bed, talking to someone on the phone. She thought I was asleep, or maybe she just didn't care anymore. She was talking to someone named Derek. I recognized the name immediately. Derek was her ex-boyfriend from college, the guy she dated before me, the one she swore she was over. She was laughing, telling him how much she missed him, how hard everything had been. And then she said it. She said she was thinking about asking him to move in, into our house, the house we bought together, the house we were supposed to grow old in. She said she didn't know how much longer she could keep pretending to care, that she was exhausted, that she just wanted to move on. She said the doctors thought I might recover some function, but she didn't want to deal with it. She wanted out. And Derek, from what I could hear, was more than happy to step in. They made plans. They talked about logistics. She even laughed at one point, a light, carefree sound that made my stomach turn. I was lying there 3 feet away from her, fighting for every tiny movement, and she was planning her new life without me, like I was already buried. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not in a loud, explosive way, in a cold, calculated way. I realized I couldn't trust anyone in that room except Claire. I realized that if I was going to survive this, I needed to protect myself. So I focused. I focused every ounce of energy I had on regaining control. Every therapy session, every small movement, every frustrating attempt to make my mouth form words. I pushed harder than I ever had in my life. And then finally, it happened. 6 weeks after the stroke, I could speak. It was rough, slurred, barely intelligible at first, but I could form words. The first time I managed to say something clear, Rebecca was in the room. She'd just gotten off another phone call with Derek, talking about paint colors for the living room. Paint colors. I gathered every bit of strength I had, looked her directly in the eyes, and said 3 words. Get me my lawyer. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments, because trust me, these stories only get wilder. Now, back to Marcus, who just asked for his lawyer instead of his wife. The look on Rebecca's face when I spoke those words, get me my lawyer, was almost worth the 6 weeks of hell. Her eyes went wide, her mouth fell open. She looked at me like I'd just risen from the dead, which I guess in a way I had. She stammered something, tried to ask what I meant, but I just stared at her. I didn't repeat myself. I didn't explain. I just waited. Claire, bless her, was in the room within seconds. She'd been monitoring my progress closely, and when she heard I'd spoken, she came running. I told her I needed my lawyer, not my family. My lawyer. Claire didn't ask questions, she made the call. Within hours, my attorney was at the hospital. Rebecca tried to stay in the room, tried to play the concerned wife, but I asked her to leave. I told the lawyer everything. Every conversation I'd overheard, every plan my family had made, every word Rebecca had said to Derek. My lawyer recorded everything, took detailed notes, and immediately started building a case. Rebecca tried to backtrack, tried to claim she was just venting, that she never meant any of it. But I had dates, I had details. I had the name of the guy she was planning to move into our house. My lawyer contacted Derek directly, and apparently he was more than willing to confirm their plans, thinking it would somehow help Rebecca. It didn't. Within 2 weeks, I filed for divorce. I had all the documentation I needed to prove her intent to abandon me, her plans to move on while I was incapacitated, and her discussions about my life insurance. My lawyer also made it very clear that any attempt to contest the divorce or claim spousal support would result in a very public, very detailed accounting of her behavior. Rebecca's family tried to intervene, tried to convince me to reconsider, but I was done. I was so far past done. My father and brother, I handled them separately. I had my lawyer send them both letters outlining everything I'd heard. Every conversation about pulling the plug, every mention of my life insurance, every cold, calculated discussion about what was best for everyone except me. I told them I wanted nothing to do with them. No visits, no calls, no relationship. My brother tried to apologize, said he was just scared, that he didn't mean it the way it sounded. But I'd heard exactly what he meant. There was no misunderstanding. My father didn't even try to apologize. He just stopped coming to the hospital. I haven't spoken to him since. I changed my will, updated all my beneficiaries, and made sure that if anything ever happened to me again, the people who tried to kill me the first time wouldn't benefit from it. Claire, the nurse who actually fought for me, got a generous thank you once I was back on my feet. I made sure she knew that she saved my life in more ways than one. The recovery process was brutal. Physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy. I had to relearn things I'd taken for granted my entire life. But every single day I thought about that phone call. I thought about Rebecca laughing with Derek. I thought about my father saying it would be kinder to let me go. And I used that anger, that betrayal, as fuel. I pushed myself harder than the therapist thought possible. I refused to let those people win. It's been 8 months now. I've regained most of my mobility. My speech is almost back to normal. I live alone in a new apartment, far away from the house I used to share with Rebecca. I've built a new life, one where the people around me actually see me as a person, not a problem or a paycheck. I still have hard days. I still have moments where I can't believe what happened, where I feel that same trapped, helpless feeling from the hospital. But then I remember that I survived. I survived the stroke, and I survived the people who were supposed to love me. Rebecca tried to reach out a few months ago. She sent me a long email full of apologies and regrets, saying she was in a bad place, that she didn't mean any of it. I deleted it without reading past the first paragraph. I don't care if she's sorry. I don't care if she regrets it. She showed me exactly who she was when she thought I couldn't fight back, and I'm never forgetting that. My brother sends a text every few weeks, usually something vague about family and forgiveness. I don't respond. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. The hardest part isn't the physical recovery, it's the emotional recovery. It's learning to trust people again when the people closest to you proved they couldn't be trusted. It's rebuilding a life when the foundation you thought you had was completely rotten. But I'm doing it. Slowly, carefully, but I'm doing it. And honestly, I'm stronger now than I ever was before. Not physically, though that's coming back too, but emotionally, mentally. I know exactly what I'm capable of surviving now, and I know exactly what I won't tolerate ever again. Speaking of families showing their true colors, imagine waking up from a coma to discover your relatives didn't just give up on you, they literally started planning how to spend your money. I've spent the last 15 years building a real estate portfolio from the ground up. Started with a duplex I barely qualified for, worked my way into flipping houses, then moved into commercial rentals. By the time I hit 40, I owned a downtown loft worth close to $1 million, 3 residential properties generating steady income, and 2 commercial spaces that paid for themselves twice over. I was proud of what I'd built. I worked for it. Every single brick, every lease agreement, every late-night renovation decision was mine. Then I had an allergic reaction to a medication I'd taken 100 times before. My body just decided one day that this particular pill was the enemy. I went into anaphylactic shock in my own kitchen, alone, and by the time the paramedics got to me, my brain had been without adequate oxygen for too long. I ended up in a coma. The doctors told my family I might wake up in days, weeks, or never. There was no way to know. I was out for 9 weeks total. But here's the thing nobody tells you about comas. Sometimes you can hear. Not always, not clearly, but enough. Enough to know what's happening around you even when you can't move, can't speak, can't even open your eyes to let anyone know you're still in there. It started during week 3. I was lying there trapped inside my own body when I heard voices in my room. Familiar voices. My older brother Tom, my younger sister Lisa, and my middle brother David. They weren't alone. There was another voice I didn't recognize immediately, professional and crisp. A lawyer. At first I thought they were there to check on me, maybe discuss my care or talk to the doctors about treatment options. I was wrong. Tom spoke first. He's always been the loudest, the one who filled silence with his own voice, whether anyone wanted to hear it or not. He said he wanted the loft, my downtown loft, the one I'd renovated myself, the one with the skyline view I'd worked 6 years to afford. He said it outright, like I was already gone, like I was already buried and they were just sorting through my belongings at an estate sale. Lisa chimed in next. She's always been quieter than Tom, but just as calculating. She called dibs on my rental portfolio. Called dibs, like we were kids fighting over who got the front seat. She said the rental income would be perfect for her since she'd just quit her job and needed something steady. I remember thinking, I'm right here, and you're talking about my properties like I'm already dead. David, my youngest brother, the accountant, the one I always thought was the most level-headed, had spreadsheets. I couldn't see them, obviously, but I heard him flipping through papers, explaining to Tom and Lisa exactly how much each property was worth and how they should liquidate everything to maximize the payout. He'd done research, he'd run the numbers, he'd planned this. The lawyer asked if they had power of attorney. That's when I learned they'd convinced my father to sign papers. My dad is 78, sharp as ever but trusting to a fault, especially with his own kids. They told him it was necessary to handle my affairs while I was incapacitated. He signed because he thought he was helping me. He had no idea what they were actually planning. Then came the part that still makes my blood run cold. Lisa said something about minimal life support. She didn't say it directly, didn't come out and suggest pulling the plug, but the implication was clear. David responded with something about how that would complicate the estate process, and they should wait until the doctors gave a clearer prognosis. Wait. Like I was a stock they were watching, waiting for the right time to sell. Tom laughed. I remember that laugh. He said something like, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves, but yeah, if it comes to that, we should probably make the call sooner than later. The lawyer didn't object, didn't say a word, just kept taking notes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to sit up and tell them exactly what I thought of them, but my body wouldn't respond. I was locked inside myself, listening to my own siblings plan out my death and divide my assets like I was already gone. They stayed for maybe 20 minutes, finalized a few details, and then left. Tom made a joke about grabbing lunch. They went to get sandwiches after planning how to carve up my life. That wasn't even the worst part. Over the next few weeks, they came back. Multiple times. Each visit, they brought updates. Tom had already contacted a realtor about the loft. Lisa had started reaching out to my tenants, introducing herself as the new landlord. David had drafted a timeline for liquidation. They were moving forward like I was never waking up. I heard everything, every cold, calculated conversation. Every time they talked about me like I was an inconvenience, a problem to solve, an obstacle between them and money they didn't earn. When I finally woke up during week 9, the first face I saw was a nurse, not my family. She was kind, smiled at me, told me I'd been through a lot and needed to take things slow. The doctors ran tests, checked my cognitive function, My memory, my motor skills. I was weak, disoriented, but my mind was intact. I remembered everything. My family visited the day after I woke up. Tom brought flowers. Lisa cried and hugged me. David stood in the corner looking relieved. They played their parts perfectly. Concerned siblings, grateful I'd pulled through, ready to support me however I needed. I didn't say a word about what I'd heard. I just smiled weakly and pretended I was confused, that my memory was spotty, that I wasn't sure what had happened or how long I'd been out. I asked simple questions, played the part of someone still recovering, still piecing things together. But the whole time, I was planning. The hospital room had a security camera. I knew that because I'd noticed it during a previous hospital stay years ago for a minor surgery. Most people don't realize those cameras record audio in some facilities, especially in ICU rooms for liability purposes. I contacted the hospital's legal department from my room, explained I needed footage for a potential legal matter, and requested copies of the recordings from my stay. They required a formal request and a small processing fee, but they complied. I also reached out to my attorney, the one who'd handled all my real estate transactions over the years. I trusted him completely. I explained the situation, told him everything I'd heard, and asked him to start building a case while keeping it completely confidential. He was horrified, but not surprised. He said family disputes over estates bring out the worst in people. Then I did something that felt extreme at the time, but turned out to be the smartest decision I ever made. I transferred every single one of my properties into an irrevocable trust. The loft, the rentals, the commercial spaces, everything. I named myself as the primary beneficiary during my lifetime, with contingency plans in place that didn't include Tom, Lisa, or David anywhere in the chain. The trust was airtight. My attorney made sure of that. It took 2 weeks to finalize everything while I was still in the hospital recovering. My siblings visited regularly during that time, keeping up the act. Tom even offered to help me manage my properties once I was out, said it might be too much for me to handle right away. I smiled and thanked him, told him I'd think about it. This is where patience finally snapped. 2 weeks after I was discharged and back home, I called a family meeting. I told Tom, Lisa, and David I wanted to discuss my recovery and my plans moving forward. I said I needed their support and wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. They showed up looking concerned and supportive, ready to play the role of devoted siblings. My attorney was there too. I'd set up a laptop on the dining room table with external speakers. I didn't waste time with small talk. I pressed play. The first recording was from week 3. Tom's voice came through the speakers, clear as day, talking about wanting the loft. Then Lisa calling dibs on the rental portfolio. Then David with his spreadsheets discussing liquidation strategies. The lawyer's voice asking about power of attorney. Their conversation about minimal life support. I watched their faces as they listened. Tom went pale. Lisa started shaking her head like she could deny it. David just stared at the laptop, frozen. I let the whole recording play. Every damning word. When it finished, I played another one. Then another. I had weeks' worth of evidence. When the last recording ended, I finally spoke. I told them I'd heard everything. I told them I knew exactly what they'd planned, how they'd manipulated Dad, how they'd started moving forward with dividing my assets before I was even declared dead. I told them I remembered every single visit, every conversation, every cold calculation. Then I told them about the trust. I explained that every property, every asset they'd tried to claim, was now locked in an irrevocable trust they couldn't touch. Not now, not ever. I'd already spoken to my father separately, explained what they'd done, and he'd revoked the power of attorney they'd tricked him into signing. He was devastated, but he understood. Tom tried to argue. He said I was taking things out of context, that they were just trying to help, that I was confused and misinterpreting everything. I cut him off. I told him my attorney had already filed a lawsuit for attempted fraud and elder abuse for manipulating our father. I told him I had no intention of settling, no interest in hearing excuses, and no desire to ever speak to any of them again. Lisa started crying, begging me to reconsider, saying she was sorry, that she didn't mean it the way it sounded. I looked at her and said, "You called dibs on my rental portfolio while I was in a coma. You discussed pulling my life support to speed up your payout. There's no other way to interpret that." David stayed silent. He didn't try to defend himself, didn't apologize, just gathered his things and left. Tom followed after one last attempt to justify himself. Lisa left last, still crying, still trying to explain. I haven't spoken to any of them since. That was over a year ago now. The lawsuit is still ongoing, but my attorney is confident we have more than enough evidence to win. My father sided with me completely, cut them out of his will, and has been spending more time with me than he has in years. He feels guilty for signing those papers, even though I've told him 100 times it wasn't his fault. As for me, I'm doing fine. Better than fine, actually. My properties are still generating income. I've fully recovered from the coma. And I've built a life that doesn't include people who saw me as nothing more than a portfolio to liquidate. They thought they could plan my exit and profit from it. Instead, they wrote themselves out of my life permanently. Asset-grabbing siblings are one thing, but wait until you hear about the boss who didn't just replace someone. He gave their entire career to his mistress. Until about 4 months ago, I was a senior architect at one of the most prestigious firms in the city. I'd worked my way up over 8 years, built a reputation, had my own office with a view, the whole thing. Then, one Saturday morning, I decided to go for a bike ride through the park, and some kid in a Tesla blew through a stop sign while checking his phone. I don't remember the impact. I remember flying through the air and then waking up in a hospital bed with more metal in my leg than a hardware store. The doctors said I was lucky. 3 surgeries, months of recovery, but I'd walk again, I'd work again. Just needed time and patience. So I focused on that, getting better, doing my physical therapy, trusting that my job would be waiting for me when I was ready to come back. I mean, I'd been there 8 years. I had projects in development worth millions. Surely they'd hold my position for a few months while I healed from getting hit by a car, right? Week 2 of my hospital stay, my boss Richard showed up. I actually felt relieved when I saw him walk through the door. Finally, I thought, someone from work who actually cares enough to visit. Maybe he brought updates on my projects, or cards from the team, or just wanted to see how I was doing. None of that happened. Richard pulled up a chair, asked how I was feeling in that tone people use when they don't actually want an honest answer, and then got straight to business. He needed my project files' passwords, all of them. The secure folders, the client databases, the design archives, everything. I should have seen the red flag right there, but I was on some pretty serious pain medication and honestly just wanted him to leave so I could sleep. I gave him the passwords, wrote them down on a notepad with a hand that could barely hold the pen. He thanked me, said the team sent their best, and was gone within 15 minutes. Didn't even ask about my prognosis or when I might be back. Just got what he came for and bounced. Week 4, I got a text from my colleague Jake. Jake and I had started at the firm around the same time, worked on a bunch of projects together, grabbed beers after work sometimes. Good guy. His text was short and clearly uncomfortable to send. It said Richard had hired a consultant named Amber to temporarily cover my role while I recovered. Temporarily. That was the word he used. I texted back asking if that was normal, and Jake replied with just a shrug emoji. Even through a text message, I could feel his unease. I tried not to spiral. Temporary consultant made sense, right? Someone to keep my projects moving, handle client meetings I couldn't attend, maintain continuity. It was actually kind of thoughtful when I framed it that way, except I couldn't shake this feeling in my gut that something was off. Richard hadn't mentioned hiring anyone when he visited, hadn't asked if I had recommendations for who should cover for me, just took my passwords and apparently made his own arrangements. And here's where it gets absurd. Week 8, still doing physical therapy 3 times a week and barely able to stand for more than 20 minutes without my legs screaming, I got a call from another colleague, Maria. She worked in a different department, but we'd collaborated enough that we were friendly. She asked if I'd heard the news. What news? I asked. She paused and I could hear her trying to figure out how to say whatever she needed to say. Then she just came out with it. Amber had moved into my office, not temporarily using it. Moved in, personal photos on the desk, nameplate on the door, the works. My stuff had been boxed up and put in storage. I felt like I'd been hit by that Tesla all over again. Maria kept talking. She said everyone was confused because Richard kept insisting I was coming back, that this was all temporary. But Amber was acting like she owned the place, taking credit for projects I'd started, sitting in on partner meetings, making decisions about my clients without consulting anyone. And then Maria dropped the real bomb. She'd seen Richard and Amber having dinner together, twice, holding hands across the table kind of dinner. This wasn't just a professional arrangement. I sat there in my apartment, leg propped up on pillows, and felt this cold clarity wash over me. Richard had replaced me, not temporarily, not as a stopgap measure until I recovered. He'd used my accident as an opportunity to install his girlfriend in my position and was banking on me either not coming back or being too intimidated to fight for my job when I did. The audacity was almost impressive. I called the firm's HR department the next day, asked to speak to someone about my leave status and return timeline. The woman I spoke to, Linda, was kind but clearly uncomfortable. She confirmed I was still technically employed, still on medical leave, but that my role had been filled on a contract basis for the foreseeable future. Foreseeable future. Not until I returned. Not temporarily. Foreseeable future. I asked about Amber specifically, about her qualifications, about the hiring process. Linda got very quiet and then said she wasn't at liberty to discuss personnel decisions, but that I should focus on my recovery, and we'd discuss my return when I was medically cleared. That's when I knew Richard had covered his tracks with HR, made it look legitimate somehow, probably told them I might not be able to return to full duties, that we needed a permanent solution, that this was in the firm's best interest. And HR, not knowing any better, went along with it. But that wasn't even the worst part. Week 9, I got access to the firm's shared drive from home. My doctor had cleared me for limited remote work, light computer tasks, staying engaged with the industry while I finished physical recovery. I logged in and started going through my project files. Every single design I'd been working on before the accident had Amber's name on it now. Presentations I'd built, client pitches I'd written, concepts I'd developed over months of work, all credited to her. She'd literally just taken my passwords, accessed my files, and slapped her name on everything, like she'd done the work herself. I started documenting everything, screenshots, file histories, metadata showing when things were created versus when they were modified. I pulled emails from before my accident showing my communications with clients, my design iterations, my problem-solving process. I built a case so airtight you couldn't slip a piece of paper through it, and I did it all while doing leg exercises in my living room and trying not to scream every time I had to climb stairs. Week 12, my doctor cleared me to return to office work part-time. I called Linda in HR and told her I'd be coming in Monday. She sounded surprised, said she'd have to check with Richard about workspace availability since my office was currently occupied. I told her that was fine, I'd take any available desk. What I didn't tell her was that I'd already contacted an employment lawyer and had a folder full of evidence sitting in my messenger bag. Then came the breaking point. Week 14, I walked into the office on a Monday morning. I'd timed it for early, around 7 before most people arrived. Wanted to avoid the awkward welcome back conversations while I handled what needed to be handled. I badged in at security, took the elevator up to the 5th floor, and there was Richard coming out of his office with a coffee. The look on his face when he saw me was worth every minute of physical therapy pain I'd endured. Pure shock, like he was seeing a ghost. He actually took a step backward. He recovered quickly though, plastered on this fake smile, and came over with his hand extended. "Derek," he said, "so good to see you up and around. We weren't expecting you back so soon. How are you feeling?" All in this tone that suggested I was being slightly unreasonable by showing up to my own job. I shook his hand, told him I was cleared by my doctors and ready to resume my duties, and watched him try to figure out how to respond. He started saying something about needing to discuss my transition back, about how things had changed in my absence, about meeting later in the week to talk through everything. I cut him off, told him I actually needed to speak with HR first thing, just some paperwork related to my leave. His smile faltered. He asked if everything was okay, if there was something he should know about. I just smiled back and said I was sure everything would work out exactly as it should. I walked straight to Linda's office. She was just settling in for the day, looked surprised to see me standing there. I closed the door behind me, sat down, and opened my folder. I told her I needed to report some concerns about activities that occurred during my medical leave. Concerns about intellectual property theft and undisclosed workplace relationships that violated company policy. Her expression shifted from confused to alarmed in about 3 seconds. I walked her through everything, showed her the evidence of Amber taking credit for my work, the file histories proving the designs were mine, the emails demonstrating my client relationships. Then I showed her the photos Maria had taken of Richard and Amber at dinner, the social media posts Amber had made and then deleted, but that I'd archived showing them on weekend trips together. The company policy clearly stating that supervisors couldn't have romantic relationships with direct reports without disclosure to HR. Linda's face went from alarmed to absolutely mortified. She started taking notes, asked if she could keep copies of everything. I had a second folder ready for her. She told me she'd need to escalate this immediately, that this was serious, that she appreciated me bringing it to her attention. She asked me to wait in a conference room while she made some calls. What happened next played out faster than I expected. Within 2 hours, I was in a meeting with Linda, the head of HR, and 2 partners from the firm I'd only met a handful of times. They asked me to walk through everything again. I did. They asked clarifying questions. I answered them. They asked if I wanted to pursue legal action. I said I wanted my job back. I wanted credit for my work, and I wanted assurance that this kind of thing wouldn't happen to anyone else. They nodded a lot and took more notes. By end of day, Amber's contract was terminated. Security escorted her out while she tried to argue that she'd done nothing wrong, that Richard had given her those files, that she didn't know they were mine. Didn't matter. She'd signed agreements about original work and intellectual property. She'd violated them. She was gone. Richard lasted until Friday. The partners called him in Thursday afternoon, and by Friday morning there was an all-staff email announcing his departure to pursue other opportunities. Corporate speak for he got fired. His office was cleared out by Monday. I watched from the conference room while facilities packed up his stuff. Tuesday of the following week, I had another meeting with the partners. They apologized profusely for what had happened, said it reflected poorly on their oversight and management. Then they offered me Richard's position. Senior management, partner track, 20% salary increase, my choice of office. They framed it as recognizing my dedication and talent, but we all knew what it really was. A settlement to keep me from suing them into oblivion. I took the job, moved into the corner office Richard used to occupy, brought in my own team, established new protocols for project attribution and leave coverage, made sure everyone knew that what happened to me wouldn't happen on my watch. The thing is, I don't think Richard ever expected me to come back. I think he saw my accident as this convenient opportunity to promote his girlfriend, and figured I'd either stay out on disability or come back so diminished that I wouldn't fight for my position. He underestimated how much anger can fuel a recovery. Every painful physical therapy session, every frustrating day of limited mobility, I was thinking about walking back into that office and watching his face when he realized I hadn't just disappeared. Some people asked if I felt bad about getting Richard fired, about ending Amber's contract. I didn't. Not even a little bit. They made their choices. They took advantage of someone who was vulnerable, who was literally in a hospital bed, recovering from a traumatic injury. That's not ambition. That's not even really betrayal. It's just cruel opportunism. And the best part? They did all the work for me. I didn't have to sabotage them or set them up. I just had to document what they were already doing and present it to people who cared about things like ethics and company policy. I've been in Richard's old position for 6 months now. My leg still aches when it rains. I probably always will have a slight limp. But every time I walk past the office that used to be mine and is now occupied by someone I hired and trust, I think about how close I came to losing everything I'd built, and how satisfying it was to take it all back. Workplace betrayal is brutal, but nothing compares to the person who's supposed to love you, rewriting your entire relationship while you're fighting for your life. I'm Jade, and I'm 32 years old. 2 months ago, I was planning my wedding. I had the venue booked, the dress picked out, the guest list finalized. My fiancé Alex and I had been together for 5 years, and I genuinely thought I knew him better than anyone in the world. Then I got sick. Not flu sick, not food poisoning sick. I'm talking a severe bacterial infection that landed me in the ICU with sepsis. The doctors sedated me heavily to let my body fight without the stress of consciousness. But here's the thing about sedation. It's not like being asleep. You drift in and out. Sometimes you're under completely, and sometimes you're floating just below the surface, aware of sounds and voices, but unable to respond. During one of those in-between moments, maybe week 3 or 4, I heard Alex's voice in my room. At first, I felt this wave of relief. He was there. He was with me. But then I realized he was on the phone, and he wasn't talking to me. He was talking to someone named Riley. I didn't know any Riley. We didn't have friends named Riley, and the way he said the name, soft and familiar, made something in my chest tighten even through the fog of medication. He was telling Riley about our relationship, but nothing he said was true. He called me controlling. He said I'd been suffocating him for years, that he felt trapped, that he couldn't be himself around me. I wanted to scream, to sit up and demand to know what he was talking about, but my body wouldn't move. I was paralyzed by drugs and shock, forced to listen as the person I loved most in the world rewrote our entire history into something unrecognizable. He laughed at one point, this casual, easy laugh, and said my illness was his escape opportunity. Those exact words, escape opportunity. He told Riley he'd already started moving his things out of our apartment, just a few boxes at a time so no one would notice. He said my friends had been so supportive, bringing him meals, checking in on him, telling him how strong he was for staying by my side through such a hard time. And the whole time, he was planning to break up with me the second I recovered. He said he'd already talked to a lawyer about the apartment lease. He wanted to know his options, wanted to make sure he could get out clean. The worst part? He sounded relieved. Actually relieved. Like my near-death experience was the best thing that had ever happened to him, because it gave him an excuse to leave without looking like the bad guy. He could play the devoted fiancé right up until I was well enough to handle the breakup, and then he could walk away with everyone's sympathy. Poor Alex, they'd say. He tried so hard, but it was just too much. No one would blame him. No one would question him. He'd positioned himself perfectly. I must have drifted back under after that, because the next thing I remember clearly was waking up 3 days later, really waking up, with doctors telling me the infection was clearing and my vitals were stabilizing. Alex was there, sitting in the chair next to my bed, holding my hand. He had tears in his eyes. He told me how scared he'd been, how he'd never left my side, how grateful he was that I was okay. And I just looked at him, this person I'd planned to marry, and I didn't recognize him at all. The nurses said I was remarkably calm for someone who'd been through what I'd been through. They kept commenting on how well I was handling everything, how positive my attitude was. They had no idea I was running calculations in my head, planning my next move, deciding how to handle the fact that my entire relationship had been a lie. I didn't say anything to Alex, not yet. I needed to be sure. I needed to be clear-headed. And honestly, I needed to see just how far he'd take the performance. He played the devoted fiancé perfectly. He brought me flowers, read to me, updated me on messages from friends and family. He talked about our wedding plans, about how we'd probably need to postpone given my recovery timeline, but how it would be worth the wait. He held my hand and told me he loved me, and every word felt like a knife because I knew the truth. I knew exactly what he'd said when he thought I couldn't hear. I spent 3 days watching him perform, taking notes, staying quiet. I asked the nurses about visitors, about who'd been coming to see me. They mentioned Alex, of course, but they also mentioned someone else, a woman named Riley who'd come by several times, always when I was sedated, always staying just a few minutes. One of the nurses, Jessica, said she'd thought it was odd because Riley didn't sign the visitor log and always seemed to be leaving just as she arrived for her shift. She'd assumed Riley was a family friend or co-worker, someone I knew. She had no idea I'd never heard the name before my hospital stay. Then came the breaking point. On day 3 of being fully conscious, I told Alex I wanted to talk. He got this concerned look on his face, asked if I was feeling okay, if I needed the nurse. I said no, I just needed to talk to him. About us, about our future. He smiled, said of course, said we could talk about anything. So I did. I told him everything I'd heard, every word of his phone conversation with Riley, every detail about feeling trapped and controlled, every mention of his escape opportunity. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might pass out. He started stammering, trying to interrupt, but I kept going. I told him I knew about the boxes he'd been moving out. I knew about the lawyer. I knew about Riley's visits. I watched him cycle through denial, anger, and panic in the span of about 30 seconds. He tried to tell me I'd misunderstood, that I'd been heavily medicated, that I must have been confused or dreaming. But I wasn't. I had details. I had timelines. I had the name Riley, which he absolutely could not explain away. He switched tactics, tried to say he'd been stressed, that he hadn't meant any of it, that he was just venting to a friend during an impossible situation. He reached for my hand and I pulled it back. I told him I didn't want his excuses. I didn't want his explanations. I wanted him to leave. He started crying then, real tears, begging me to reconsider, saying he'd made a mistake, that he loved me, that we could work through this. I just looked at him and said no, we couldn't, because I'd never be able to unhear what he said. I'd never be able to trust him again. I took off my engagement ring, the one he'd proposed with on a beach in Mexico 2 years ago, and I handed it back to him. He refused to take it at first, but I left it on the bedside table. I told him our apartment was in my name only. He'd need to have all his things out within 2 weeks. I told him I'd be telling our friends exactly why we ended, not some sanitized version where we grew apart, or the stress was too much. The truth, all of it. He tried one more time to convince me I was making a mistake, that I was acting rashly, that I should take time to think about it, but there was nothing to think about. He'd already made the decision for both of us when he started planning his exit strategy while I was fighting for my life. He'd already ended our relationship. I was just making it official. After he left, I asked Jessica, the nurse who'd mentioned Riley, if she could describe the woman. She did, in detail. Then I asked if she'd be willing to confirm she'd seen this woman visiting multiple times if anyone asked. Jessica looked uncomfortable for a moment, then said she'd tell the truth if it came to that. She'd seen what she'd seen. That was enough for me. When I was discharged 2 weeks later, Alex's things were gone from the apartment. He'd left without a final conversation, without any attempt to change my mind. Our mutual friends started reaching out, confused about what had happened. Most of them had seen Alex playing the devoted partner role at the hospital. They'd brought him food, offered him support, told him how lucky I was to have him. So when I told them we'd broken up, they were shocked. Some of them even asked if I was sure I was thinking clearly, if maybe my illness had affected my judgment. I told them everything, not in a vindictive way, not trying to destroy him, just factually. This is what happened. This is what I heard. This is why we're done. Some believed me immediately. Others were skeptical until Jessica, the nurse, confirmed that yes, there had been another woman visiting during my ICU stay. Yes, she'd seen them together. Yes, it had seemed inappropriate even at the time. Alex tried to control the narrative for a while, telling people I'd changed after my illness, that I'd become paranoid and irrational, that he'd tried to support me but I'd pushed him away. But too many people had pieces of the real story. Too many had met Riley or heard him mention feeling trapped. The truth came out in fragments, and eventually his version fell apart under the weight of evidence. The hardest part wasn't losing Alex. Honestly, once I knew who he really was, I didn't want him back. The hardest part was realizing I'd built my entire future around someone who was secretly counting the days until he could leave. The apartment we'd decorated together, the wedding we'd planned, the life I thought we were building, it was all built on a foundation that didn't exist. He'd been performing for years, and I'd never noticed. I'm 6 weeks out from discharge now. I've redecorated the apartment, turned his office into a reading room, rearranged furniture so it feels like mine instead of ours. I've started therapy to work through the layers of betrayal, not just from the hospital, but from realizing our entire relationship had been a lie. And I've made peace with the fact that getting sick, as terrible as it was, showed me the truth before I married someone who would have eventually left anyway. Better to find out in a hospital bed than after a wedding. Riley, by the way, reached out to me. She claimed she hadn't known I existed until after I was in the hospital, that Alex had told her we'd already broken up. She apologized, said she felt horrible. I don't know if I believe her, but it doesn't really matter. She's welcome to him. They deserve each other. The recovery from sepsis was brutal, but the recovery from Alex has been worse in some ways. Physical health you can measure. You can see your white blood cell count improve, watch your strength return. But emotional recovery is messier. It's not linear. Some days I'm fine, grateful even, that I dodged a lifetime with someone who didn't really love me. Other days I'm furious, grieving not for Alex, but for the version of him I thought I knew. And some days I'm just tired of having to rebuild everything from scratch, but I'm doing it. Slowly, carefully, but I'm doing it. And next time, if there is a next time, I'll know what real love looks like. It doesn't plan escape routes. It doesn't rewrite history. It doesn't see your crisis as an opportunity. Real love shows up, tells the truth, and stays. Everything else is just a performance. Partners can betray you, sure, but family can do something even worse. They can literally take over your entire life and refuse to hand it back. I'm Nathan, and I'm 38 years old. 5 months ago, I had a traumatic brain injury. I was cycling, got hit by a car that ran a stop sign, and woke up 3 days later in a hospital with doctors telling me I was lucky to be alive. Lucky. That's the word they used. At the time, I didn't feel lucky. I felt like my skull had been cracked open and put back together wrong. Turns out, that's pretty much what happened. The recovery process was brutal. I spent 5 months in rehabilitation, relearning basic things like walking without losing my balance, speaking without slurring my words, remembering what day it was. The doctors said I was making remarkable progress, that my brain was healing faster than they'd expected. But 5 months is a long time to be away from your life. A long time for things to fall apart if you're not there to hold them together. I own a small digital marketing consultancy. Nothing massive, but it's mine. I built it from scratch over the last decade, have a steady roster of clients, make enough to live comfortably and save for the future. When I had the accident, I needed someone to keep things running, pay the bills, communicate with clients, make sure the business didn't collapse while I was in rehab. My sister Carolyn volunteered immediately. She insisted, actually, said family takes care of family, that she'd handle everything until I was back on my feet. She got emergency power of attorney. It made sense at the time. I wasn't in any condition to manage my own affairs. And Carolyn had always been organized, responsible, the kind of person who color codes her calendar and keeps spreadsheets for her grocery lists. I trusted her. My lawyer set up the POA with the understanding that it would be temporary, just until I recovered enough to take back control. That was the plan anyway. When I finally got clearance to leave rehab and return home, I was exhausted but hopeful. I'd worked incredibly hard to get to this point, pushed through therapy sessions that left me in tears, forced my brain to rewire itself into something functional again. I was ready to reclaim my life. I was ready to thank Carolyn for holding down the fort and start transitioning everything back to normal. She met me at my apartment the day I got home. She had my keys, which made sense since she'd been managing the place. But when I asked her for them back, she hesitated. She said we needed to talk first, that there were some things we needed to discuss about the business and my finances. I sat down, still feeling weak, and asked what was going on. That's when she told me she'd changed all my passwords. Email, banking, business accounts, everything. She said it was for security purposes, that she'd been managing everything and needed to keep things organized. I asked her to give me the new passwords so I could start taking over again. She said it wasn't that simple, and here's where it gets absurd. Carolyn told me she'd been talking to my clients, explaining that I was permanently disabled and wouldn't be able to continue working. She said she'd transition them to working with her instead, that she was now running the business. She'd rerouted all the business income to an account I didn't have access to. She'd essentially taken over my entire company while I was in rehab, and now she was telling me I couldn't have it back. I thought she was joking at first. I actually laughed, waiting for her to crack a smile and admit this was some weird, stress-induced humor. But she didn't laugh. She just looked at me with this calm, almost pitying expression and said she'd filed legal paperwork to make the power of attorney permanent. She claimed I lacked the mental capacity to manage my own affairs, that the brain injury had left me unable to make sound decisions. I felt my entire body go cold. I asked her what she was talking about. The doctors had cleared me. I'd passed every cognitive test. I was recovering, not permanently disabled. She pulled out a folder, handed me documents I'd never seen before, legal forms claiming I was mentally incompetent, forms she'd filed without telling me, using the POA I'd given her in good faith. You almost have to admire the audacity, taking over someone's life while they're recovering from a brain injury and then claiming they're too damaged to get it back. That's a level of calculated betrayal I didn't think existed outside of crime dramas. I asked her to leave. I needed time to process what was happening, to figure out my next move. She left the documents on my coffee table and told me she'd be in touch, that we could work something out eventually. Work something out. Like she was doing me a favor by stealing my business and my financial autonomy. The moment she was gone, I called my lawyer, the same one who'd set up the original power of attorney. I explained everything, told him what Carolyn had done, what she was claiming. He was silent for a long moment, and then he said we needed to move fast. If she'd already filed paperwork claiming I was incompetent, we needed to counter it immediately with proof that I wasn't. I spent the next week gathering medical evaluations, my neurologist, my rehabilitation therapist, my primary care doctor. Every single one of them wrote detailed reports confirming I had full mental capacity, that I was competent to make my own decisions, that my recovery was progressing exactly as expected. My neurologist was actually angry when I explained what was happening. She said using a temporary brain injury to claim permanent incompetence was not only unethical, but medically inaccurate. My lawyer filed an emergency motion to revoke the power of attorney and restore my access to my own accounts. We submitted all the medical evaluations, documented the timeline of my recovery, and requested a competency hearing. The judge granted it within days, but that wasn't even the worst part. While my lawyer was preparing for the hearing, I asked him to audit everything Carolyn had done with my accounts. I wanted to know exactly where my money had gone, what she'd been doing with the business income. What we found was worse than I'd imagined. Carolyn had been paying herself a caretaker fee, $6,000 a month, for 5 months. She'd taken $30,000 from my business account, claiming it was compensation for managing my affairs, except she wasn't caring for me. I was in a rehabilitation facility with professional staff. She visited maybe twice the entire time I was there. She'd been paying herself a salary for work she wasn't doing, using money from a business she'd stolen, and it got worse. She'd also been charging personal expenses to my business account. Dinners, shopping, a weekend trip to Vegas. She'd spent another $10,000 of my money on herself, categorizing it all as business expenses. My lawyer documented everything, built a case that showed a clear pattern of financial exploitation. The competency hearing was surreal. Carolyn showed up with her own lawyer, tried to argue that I was still recovering, that it was too soon to make big decisions. My medical team testified against her claims. My neurologist presented brain scans, cognitive test results, detailed progress reports. The judge asked me direct questions, assessed my responses, and within an hour ruled that I had full mental capacity and that the power of attorney was immediately revoked. Carolyn's face when the judge made that ruling was something I'll never forget. She genuinely believed she was going to win, that she could claim my business and my life and face no consequences. But the hearing was just the beginning. My lawyer filed a civil suit for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and financial exploitation. We had all the documentation, every transaction, every inflated caretaker fee, every personal expense charged to my business. The evidence was overwhelming. The court battle took 8 months. 8 months of depositions, hearings, back and forth between lawyers. Carolyn tried to claim she'd done everything in good faith, that she'd been trying to protect me. But the $6,000 monthly payments to herself kind of destroyed that argument. So did the Vegas trip and the designer handbags charged to my business account. I want everything back. The business, the accounts, every client relationship she'd tried to claim. The judge ordered her to repay every dollar she'd taken, plus legal fees and damages, over $40,000 total. She tried to appeal, claimed she couldn't afford it. The judge didn't care. She'd stolen from her brother while he was recovering from a traumatic brain injury. There wasn't a lot of sympathy in that courtroom. The district attorney also got involved. Turned out what Carolyn did wasn't just civilly wrong, it was criminally wrong. She's now facing fraud charges. Elder abuse laws sometimes extend to exploitation of people with disabilities, and apparently what she did falls under that umbrella. Her trial is scheduled for next year. My lawyer says she'll likely take a plea deal to avoid jail time, but either way, she's going to have a criminal record. As for our relationship, it's over. Completely, permanently over. My parents tried to intervene, asked me to drop the charges, said Carolyn made a mistake and we're family. I told them what she did wasn't a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill or miscommunicating with a client, systematically stealing from your incapacitated brother and then trying to have him declared incompetent so he can't fight back. That's not a mistake. That's calculated exploitation. I haven't spoken to Carolyn since the final court date. She tried to reach out a few times, sent emails that my lawyer advised me not to read. I blocked her number, her email, every possible way she could contact me. Some people think I'm being too harsh, that I should forgive her because she's family. But those people didn't spend 5 months fighting to recover from a brain injury, only to come home and discover their own sister had stolen their entire life. I'm doing okay now. The business is back under my control, my clients are happy to be working with me again, and my finances are slowly recovering. The brain injury still affects me sometimes. I get headaches, have trouble with complex multitasking, need more sleep than I used to, but I'm functional, I'm competent, and I'm in control of my own life again. Carolyn underestimated two things: my determination to recover and my willingness to fight back. She thought I'd be too damaged, too weak, too grateful for her help to question what she was doing. She was wrong on every count. At least Nathan got his business back, unlike the person whose family literally planned their funeral before they were even dead. I'm Vanessa, and I'm 45 years old. 11 weeks ago, I had an aneurysm rupture while I was cooking dinner for my 16-year-old daughter. One moment I was chopping vegetables, the next I was on the floor with the worst pain I'd ever felt in my life. My daughter called 911, rode with me in the ambulance, and sat in the waiting room while surgeons tried to save my life. They gave me a 15% survival chance. 15%. Those aren't odds anyone wants to hear. I survived the surgery, but I didn't wake up. I slipped into a coma, and the doctors told my family it could be days, weeks, or never. My daughter stayed by my side as much as the hospital would allow. My mother flew in from 2 states away. My 2 brothers drove in together. For the first few days, I assumed they were all worried, all hopeful, all doing what family is supposed to do during a crisis. But I wouldn't know, because I couldn't see them. I could only hear. Week 6. I'd been unconscious for a month and a half. My daughter was at school, probably trying to maintain some sense of normalcy, while her mum lay in a hospital bed fighting for survival. That's when my mother and my 2 brothers decided to have a meeting in my room. I heard them come in, heard chairs scraping across the floor, heard my mother's voice saying they needed to talk about things. I thought maybe they were discussing my care, treatment options, whether to try something experimental. I was wrong. They were planning my funeral. My older brother Mark started it. He said they needed to be practical, that if things didn't improve soon, they should have arrangements in place. My mother agreed immediately, said it was the responsible thing to do. My younger brother Kyle suggested a church near my house, said it would be convenient for guests. They discussed it like they were planning a dinner party. Mark talked about flowers. He thought lilies would be appropriate. My mother disagreed, said I'd always liked roses better. They debated colors, arrangements, whether to do an open or closed casket. I was screaming inside, begging them to stop, to talk about me like I was still alive, to show even a shred of hope that I might recover. But my body wouldn't respond. I just lay there, trapped, listening to them plan my death. They picked a reception venue. Kyle knew a place that did catering, said it was affordable and had good reviews. My mother asked how many people they should plan for. Mark guessed around 100, maybe more depending on how many people from my work showed up. They talked about who would speak, who would handle logistics, who would organize the guest list. Then the conversation shifted, and somehow it got even worse. Mark brought up my life insurance, $500,000. I'd taken out the policy years ago when my daughter was born, wanted to make sure she'd be taken care of if anything happened to me. It was for her. Everything I did was for her. But Mark didn't mention my daughter. He said 500,000 was a decent amount, asked my mother if she knew who the beneficiaries were. My mother said she thought it was probably split between her and my brothers, that I'd always been close with family and would want to take care of everyone. That wasn't true. I'd never discussed my life insurance with her. She was making assumptions, or maybe just wishful thinking. Kyle jumped in. He said if it was going to be split, it should be 3 ways, equal shares for my mother and both brothers. He said it was only fair, that they'd all been there for me over the years. My older brother agreed. They started doing math out loud, dividing up money I wasn't even dead yet to claim. Then Mark mentioned my house. I'd paid off my mortgage 2 years ago. One of my proudest achievements. It was a 3-bedroom in a good school district. Nothing fancy but mine. Mark said he wanted it. Just like that. Said his family was outgrowing their current place and my house would be perfect for them. My mother asked what would happen to my daughter. Mark said she could stay with them if she wanted, or maybe go live with her father. Her father left when she was 2. He sends a birthday card maybe once every 3 years. He's not an option and never has been. But Mark didn't seem concerned about that detail. Kyle said selling the house made more sense, that they could split the proceeds along with the insurance money. My mother agreed that was more practical. They discussed real estate agents, market value, how quickly they could list it after I died. After I died, they were already planning the sale. Not once in that entire conversation did they talk about my daughter beyond a passing mention. Not once did they discuss what she would need, how she would survive, what would happen to a 16-year-old girl who just lost her mother. They were too busy dividing up assets like I was already gone. I wanted to wake up just to scream at them, but I couldn't. I could only listen and remember every single word. And here's where it gets absurd. My mother started talking about what she'd do with her share of the money. She wanted to finally take that trip to Europe she'd been planning for years. Kyle mentioned paying off his credit cards and maybe buying a boat. Mark talked about renovations for the house he was planning to take from me. They were spending my money, my life insurance meant for my child, before I was even dead. The meeting lasted maybe 45 minutes. When they finally left, I heard my mother say something about getting lunch. They went to eat after planning how to divide up my life. 3 weeks later, I woke up. The doctors called it remarkable, said my recovery was ahead of all expectations. My daughter was there, crying, holding my hand, telling me how scared she'd been. She'd been visiting every day, sometimes twice a day, sitting with me and talking to me even though I couldn't respond. She'd kept up with school, kept the house running, kept herself together through the worst experience of her young life. My mother and brothers visited the day after I regained consciousness. They brought flowers, said they were so relieved, so grateful I'd pulled through. They hugged me, told me how much they loved me, how worried they'd been. Mark even joked about how tough I was, how I'd beaten the odds. I smiled. I thanked them for coming. I didn't say a word about what I'd heard, but I remembered everything. As soon as I was stable enough to handle paperwork, I contacted my lawyer from my hospital bed. I explained the situation, told him everything I'd overheard, and asked him to change my beneficiaries immediately. My daughter became the sole beneficiary of my life insurance policy. I created a trust to manage the funds until she turned 21, named a trustee I actually trusted, and made sure my mother and brothers couldn't touch a single dollar. I also updated my will. My house goes to my daughter. My retirement accounts, my savings, everything I've worked for my entire life, it all goes to her. My mother and brothers aren't mentioned anywhere in the document except for a single line that says I'm intentionally excluding them for reasons they're aware of. Then I wrote a letter, a detailed 5-page letter explaining exactly what I'd heard during week 6 of my coma. I quoted them. I included dates, times, specific conversations about my funeral, my insurance money, my house. I explained how it felt to lie there helpless while they carved up my life before I was even dead. I told them how they never once considered my daughter, their niece, the child who'd just lost her mother. I ended the letter by telling them I wanted nothing to do with them ever again. No calls, no visits, no apologies. I was done. I made 3 copies. I mailed one to my mother, one to Mark, and one to Kyle. Then I blocked all their numbers. They tried to respond. My mother showed up at my house 2 days after receiving the letter. I didn't answer the door. Mark sent emails, long rambling explanations about how I'd misunderstood, how they were just trying to be prepared, how they never meant anything malicious. Kyle tried to reach me through mutual friends, asking them to tell me he was sorry, that he wanted to make things right. I ignored all of it. There's no misunderstanding. I heard exactly what they said. I heard exactly what they meant. They showed me who they really were when they thought I couldn't hear them, when they thought there would be no consequences. And I'm never forgetting that. It's been 3 months since I woke up. I'm still in physical therapy, still recovering, but I'm getting stronger every day. My daughter and I are closer than ever. She knows what happened. I showed her the letter I sent them. She cried, said she couldn't believe her own grandmother would do something like that. But she also said she was proud of me for standing up for both of us. My mother and brothers haven't stopped trying to contact me. They sent a card on my birthday last month, signed by all 3 of them, saying they missed me and wanted to talk. I threw it away without reading past the first line. They don't get to miss me now. They already mourned me once, planned my funeral, divided up my assets. They can live with the consequences of treating me like I was already dead. The funny thing is, they probably thought they were being practical. They probably convinced themselves they were just being responsible, planning ahead, making sure everything was handled if the worst happened. But they weren't talking about if the worst happened. They were talking like it already had, like I was already gone, and they were just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. I survived a ruptured aneurysm with a 15% survival chance. I survived 11 weeks in a coma, but I almost didn't survive hearing my own family plan my funeral while I was still breathing. The aneurysm didn't kill me, but their greed almost did. They wanted my house, my money, my life insurance. Instead, they lost me, permanently. And honestly, I'm better off without them. Vanessa's family planned a funeral, but at least they weren't actively celebrating her absence, unlike the co-workers who threw a goodbye party. I'm Tyler, and I'm 31 years old. 3 months ago, I had a massive heart attack. Not the kind where you feel some chest pain and go to the ER as a precaution. I'm talking full cardiac arrest, ambulance, paddles, the whole dramatic scene. I'm a software developer, so my job is pretty sedentary. I thought I was healthy enough. Turns out genetics had other plans. The doctors said I'd need at least 6 months before I could even think about returning to work. 6 months to recover, rebuild my strength, and make sure my heart could handle the stress of daily life again. My company sent flowers to the hospital. A nice arrangement, nothing fancy, with a card signed by the team. It said things like, "Get well soon," and "We miss you," and "Take all the time you need." I remember feeling grateful. These were good people, I thought. They cared. My manager even called me a week after I was discharged, asked how I was doing, told me not to worry about work, that they had everything covered. Just focus on getting better, he said. So I did. The first month was brutal. I couldn't walk up a flight of stairs without feeling winded. I had physical therapy, cardiac rehab, dietary changes, medication schedules. It was a full-time job just trying to feel human again. But by month 2, I was improving faster than expected. My cardiologist was cautiously optimistic. By month 3, I was walking 3 miles a day, feeling stronger, feeling like myself again. I wasn't cleared to return to work yet, but I was getting close. I started thinking about the office, about my projects, about the team. I missed it, honestly. I missed the routine, the problem solving, the casual conversations over coffee. So I decided to surprise everyone with a visit. Nothing formal, just dropping by on a Friday afternoon to say hi, let them see I was doing well, maybe grab a drink with some coworkers after. I figured it would be good for morale, show them I was on the mend and planning to come back soon. I drove to the office on a Friday around 4 in the afternoon. The parking lot was full, which was normal. I badged in at the front desk and the security guard did a double take when he saw me. He seemed like he wanted to say something but just waved me through. I thought that was weird but didn't dwell on it. I took the elevator up to the 3rd floor where my team sat, feeling this weird mix of nervousness and excitement. The floor was quieter than usual. Most people had their headphones on or were in meetings. I walked toward my old desk area and noticed the conference room door was closed with the blinds drawn. There were voices inside, laughter, the clink of glasses. I figured someone was having a team celebration, maybe a project milestone or a birthday. Then I got close enough to see through a gap in the blinds. And here's where it gets absurd. The conference room was decorated, balloons, streamers, a cake on the table, and a banner stretched across the back wall that read, "Goodbye Tyler, we'll miss you," in big block letters. My co-workers were standing around eating cake and drinking what looked like champagne. Champagne. At 4 in the afternoon, on a work day, and my manager Stephen was standing at the front of the room giving some kind of speech. I stood there for a second trying to process what I was seeing. Then I opened the door, just walked right in. The room went silent so fast it was like someone had hit a mute button. Stephen stopped mid-sentence, his mouth literally hanging open. My co-workers froze with cake forks halfway to their mouths. And there, standing next to Stephen with a champagne flute in his hand, was a guy I'd never seen before. Young, maybe mid-20s, wearing a company polo that still had the fold lines in it. Fresh hire, clearly. I looked at the banner, looked at Stephen, looked at the stranger in my company's polo, and I said, "I'm cleared to return Monday. Hope that's not a problem." You could have heard a pin drop. Actually, I think someone did drop something because there was a small clatter from the back of the room. Stephen's face went through about 5 different colors in 3 seconds. Red, then white, then kind of a grayish pale that suggested he might be having his own cardiac event. The young guy next to him, who I would later learn was named Chad, looked confused. He glanced at Stephen like he was waiting for someone to explain the joke. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. I let the silence hang there for a good 10 seconds, just taking in the scene. The cake that said, "We'll miss you, Tyler," in frosting. The champagne. The looks of absolute horror on my co-workers' faces. Then I nodded, said I'd see everyone Monday, and walked out. Behind me, I heard the room explode into frantic, whispered conversation, but I didn't stick around to listen. I went home, sat on my couch, and just stared at the wall for about an hour, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. They'd thrown me a goodbye party, while I was still employed, while I was recovering from a heart attack with every intention of returning. They'd already replaced me, hired someone new, and were celebrating getting rid of me like I was some problem they'd finally solved. The thing that really got me was the banner. Someone had to order that. Someone had to type out, "Goodbye, Tyler, we'll miss you," and approve the design and pay for it. Someone had to plan this party, send out the invites, buy the cake and champagne. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. This was organized, premeditated. They'd all agreed I was done and decided to celebrate. That weekend was long. I didn't hear from anyone at the office. Not Stephen, not HR, nobody. Just silence. On Monday morning, I got dressed in actual work clothes for the first time in 3 months. My cardiologist had cleared me for part-time hours starting that week. I had the paperwork in my bag. I drove to the office, badged in, and took the elevator up. Stephen was waiting by my old desk. He looked like he hadn't slept all weekend. He immediately pulled me into a conference room, different from the one where they'd had the party, and started apologizing. He said there had been a misunderstanding, that he'd assumed I wasn't coming back, that he'd needed to fill my position to keep projects moving. He said Chad, the new guy, had already been reassigned to a different team. He said we could work something out, get me back up to speed, find a place for me. I just looked at him and asked if HR had approved my termination. He got very quiet. Then he admitted that no, HR hadn't approved anything because I'd never been terminated. I was still on medical leave. He'd just assumed, based on the severity of my heart attack and the recovery timeline, that I'd probably take long-term disability or resign. So he'd move forward with hiring a replacement without actually going through any official process. The level of confidence required to throw someone a goodbye party when you haven't even officially fired them is honestly kind of impressive in the worst way possible. I told Stephen I'd be speaking with HR directly. He tried to convince me that wasn't necessary, that we could handle this internally, but I was already done with the conversation. I went straight to HR, explained the situation, showed them my medical clearance, and asked for clarification on my employment status. The HR director looked horrified. She pulled my file, confirmed I was still actively employed on medical leave, and asked me to walk her through exactly what had happened Friday. I told her everything. The party, the banner, the champagne, Chad standing there in a company polo like he owned the place. I even had a photo on my phone that one of my coworkers had posted to social media before quickly deleting it. The HR director's expression got darker with every detail. She thanked me for bringing this to her attention and said she'd be handling it personally. By end of day Monday, Stephen had been demoted. Not fired, but removed from his management position and reassigned to an individual contributor role. Chad was moved to a completely different department, and I was officially back with an apology from the company, a guarantee that my medical leave had been handled appropriately, and a new manager who actually seemed competent. My co-workers didn't know how to act around me at first. The ones who'd been at the party avoided eye contact, mumbled apologies, tried to pretend it hadn't happened. A few of them, to their credit, came to me directly and said they'd felt uncomfortable about the whole thing, but didn't know how to push back against Stephen. I appreciated the honesty, even if it didn't excuse the participation. The weirdest part was finding out Stephen had told the team I'd sent an email saying I wouldn't be returning. Multiple people confirmed he'd shared this in a team meeting. Except I'd never sent that email. He'd fabricated it, used it to justify hiring Chad, and then thrown a party to celebrate solving a problem he'd created in his own head. The audacity was almost impressive. I've been back for 2 months now. My new manager is great, actually checks in on how I'm doing, respects my boundaries around workload as I build back to full capacity. I work from home twice a week, which helps with energy management, and I've rebuilt relationships with the co-workers who own their mistake and apologize genuinely. The others I keep at professional distance. Stephen still works here, 3 desks down from me now, no longer in charge of anything. We don't speak. Every time I see him, I think about that banner, about the champagne, about how certain he was that I'd never walk back through that door. And every time, I'm glad I proved him wrong. Office politics are ugly, but they're nothing compared to the intimate betrayal of hearing your mother reveal a secret she never meant you to know. I'm Olivia, and I'm 27 years old. 8 weeks ago, I was driving home from work when a semi-truck ran a red light and hit my car at full speed. The paramedics said I flatlined twice before they got me to the hospital. I don't remember any of it. I don't remember the impact, the ambulance, the emergency surgery. I remember leaving my office building, and then nothing until I woke up 2 months later in a hospital bed. The doctors told my family I was in a coma, and they didn't know when or if I'd wake up. My mum apparently never left the hospital those first few days. She slept in a chair next to my bed, held my hand constantly, talked to me even though I couldn't respond. My dad had to practically force her to go home and shower. She was convinced if she left, I'd die alone. Week 5. I'd been unconscious for over a month. My vitals were stable, but there was no sign of consciousness. No indication I was aware of anything happening around me. But I was. Not fully, not clearly. But I could hear voices sometimes. I couldn't open my eyes or move or respond, but sound got through. Fragments of conversation mostly. Nurses checking monitors, doctors discussing treatment plans, my dad's voice reading me articles from the newspaper, and my mum. I heard my mum more than anyone else. One afternoon, I think it was afternoon based on how quiet the hospital was, my mum came in alone. I heard her pull the chair close to my bed, heard her take my hand. Her hands were always cold. She started talking, the way she had been for weeks, just casual updates about what was happening at home, what my friends were doing. Small talk meant to fill the silence. Then her voice changed. Got quieter, heavier. She said she was sorry. Sorry for everything. Sorry for lying to me my whole life. I thought she was being dramatic, the way people get when someone they love is dying, saying things they don't really mean, making apologies for minor mistakes blown out of proportion by grief. But that wasn't what she meant. She said my dad wasn't my biological father. Just like that. No build-up, no gentle explanation. Just the fact, dropped into the silence of that hospital room like it was something she'd been carrying for too long and couldn't hold anymore. She said she'd had an affair 28 years ago. She was working as an assistant for a man named Richard, some corporate executive she'd never mentioned in any story from her past. The affair lasted 6 months. She got pregnant. She never told Richard. She was already married to my dad, had been for 3 years at that point, and they'd been trying for a baby. So when she found out she was pregnant, she just let everyone assume it was my dad's. My dad never questioned it. He was thrilled. He'd wanted kids since they got married. He was there for every doctor's appointment, every ultrasound, the delivery. He cut my umbilical cord. He cried when he held me for the first time. He raised me as his daughter for 27 years and apparently never once suspected I wasn't biologically his. My mum kept talking. She said she'd ended the affair as soon as she found out about the pregnancy, quit her job, cut off all contact with Richard. She said she'd tried to forget it ever happened, to convince herself it didn't matter because my dad was my real father in every way that counted. But the guilt had been eating at her for nearly 3 decades, and here's where it gets absurd. She said she was telling me this now, while I was in a coma, because she needed to clear her conscience before I died. She couldn't live with the guilt anymore, couldn't face the possibility that I'd die never knowing the truth. She said it wasn't fair to me, that I deserved to know who I really was, even if I couldn't hear her, except I could hear her, every single word. She cried after that. I heard her sobbing next to my bed, still holding my hand, saying she was sorry over and over. She said she'd never meant to hurt anyone, that she loved my dad, that she loved me, that she'd made a mistake 28 years ago and had been paying for it ever since. Then she left. I heard her footsteps, the door closing, and then nothing but the beeping of monitors and my own thoughts screaming inside a body that wouldn't respond. 2 weeks later, I woke up. The doctors said it was a miracle, that my recovery was exceeding all expectations. My mum was there when I opened my eyes, and she burst into tears the second I looked at her. She held my hand, the same hand she'd held while confessing her decades-old secret, and told me how scared she'd been, how grateful she was that I was okay. I smiled. I hugged her when I was strong enough to lift my arms. I told her I loved her, and I didn't say a single word about what I'd heard. I needed time Time to process, time to decide what to do with information I was never supposed to have. Information she'd only told me because she thought I was dying and would never be able to confront her with it. For 3 months I played along. I went to physical therapy, relearned how to walk without assistance, rebuilt my strength. My mum visited constantly, brought me meals, helped me with exercises, acted like the devoted mother she'd always been. My dad came too, of course. He'd sit with me for hours, tell me stories about things that happened while I was in the coma, make me laugh even when my ribs hurt from the accident. Every time I looked at him, I thought about what my mum had said. This man who'd raised me, who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework and walked me down the aisle at my college graduation, wasn't my biological father. And he had no idea. I didn't know what to do with that. Part of me wanted to tell him, to give him the truth my mum had stolen from him. Part of me wanted to protect him from information that would destroy him. And part of me was just angry. Angry at my mum for lying for 27 years. Angry at her for only confessing when she thought I'd never wake up. Angry at myself for not knowing what the right thing to do was. Month 4, I took a DNA test, one of those ancestry kits you order online. I told myself I just wanted to know for sure, wanted to confirm what my mum had said wasn't some guilt-induced hallucination or misremembering of events. The results came back in 6 weeks. 0 genetic relation to my dad's side of the family. Strong matches to people with my mum's background, and 1 close match to a man named Richard Morrison, age 56, living 2 states away. I stared at his profile picture for an hour. He had my eyes, same shape, same color. Same nose too, now that I was looking for similarities. This stranger I'd never met had given me half my DNA and didn't even know I existed. I sent him a message through the Ancestry site, kept it simple, said I'd gotten some unexpected results on my DNA test and wondered if he'd be willing to talk. He responded within a day, said he'd be happy to discuss it, gave me his phone number. We talked for 2 hours that first call. I told him my name, my age, that I grew up in the city where he used to work almost 3 decades ago. I could hear him doing the math in his head. He got very quiet, asked if my mother's name was Jennifer. I said yes. He didn't know. He genuinely had no idea. He said he'd had a brief relationship with a woman named Jennifer who worked as his assistant, that she'd quit suddenly and he'd never heard from her again. He'd assumed she just moved on, found another job, forgot about him. It never occurred to him she might have been pregnant. He asked if he could meet me, said he understood if I wasn't ready, that this was a lot to process, but he'd like the chance to know me if I was willing. I said yes. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our cities. It was awkward at first, both of us trying to figure out how to talk to each other, what to say to someone who's technically your parent but also a complete stranger. But he was kind, asked about my life, my interests, what I did for work, told me about himself, his career, his family. He'd been married for 20 years, had 2 kids. I had half-siblings I'd never met. He said he wished he'd known about me, that he would have been there if Jennifer had told him. I believed him. I don't know if that makes the situation better or worse, but I believed him. When I got home from that meeting, my mum was waiting at my apartment. She'd let herself in with the spare key I'd given her years ago, was sitting on my couch looking worried. She asked where I'd been, said she'd been trying to reach me. I told her I'd been having coffee with Richard Morrison. The look on her face was something I'll never forget. Pure terror. She started stammering, asking how I knew that name, how I'd found him. I told her the truth, that I'd heard her confession while I was in the coma, that I'd taken a DNA test, that I'd reached out to my biological father and he'd been happy to meet me. She started crying immediately, begging me not to tell Dad, saying it would destroy him, destroy our family. She said she'd made a mistake 28 years ago and had spent every day since trying to make up for it by being a good wife and mother. She said telling Dad now wouldn't fix anything, would only cause pain. I asked her why she'd told me at all. If she was so concerned about protecting Dad, why confess while I was unconscious? She said she thought I was dying, that she couldn't let me die without knowing the truth. I asked if she'd planned to tell me if I'd woken up, or if this was only meant to be a deathbed confession she never thought I'd hear. She didn't answer that question. It's been a year now. I still haven't told Dad. I see Richard every few weeks, have gotten to know my half-siblings, built a relationship with this whole other side of my family. My mum knows about it, hates it, begs me constantly to cut contact. I haven't decided what I'm going to do long term. Part of me thinks Dad deserves to know. He spent 27 years loving and raising a daughter who isn't biologically his, and he should have the choice about whether that matters to him. Part of me thinks telling him would be cruel, would take away the father-daughter relationship we've built over nearly 3 decades for no good reason. And part of me is still just angry that I have to make this choice at all. My mum created this situation. She lied for 27 years, only confessed because she thought I'd never wake up to confront her. And now I'm the one stuck deciding whether to blow up our family or keep living with a secret that's eating me alive. I don't know what the right answer is. Maybe there isn't one. All I know is that I survived a coma and a near-fatal accident, and somehow the hardest part of my recovery has been dealing with a lie my mother told before I was even born. Olivia's dealing with a decades-old lie, but imagine hearing lies being told about you in real time by the friends you thought you could trust. I'm Chris, 33 years old, and 6 weeks ago I got hit with a sudden illness that put me in a medically induced coma. The doctors said it was some kind of severe infection, the kind that escalates so fast you don't even realize you're sick until you're unconscious in an ICU. One day I was fine, the next day I was sedated and hooked up to machines while my body fought to survive. Being in a medically induced coma isn't like sleeping. Sometimes you're completely under, and sometimes you're floating just beneath the surface, aware of sounds and voices, but unable to move or respond. It's like being trapped in your own body, conscious but paralyzed. And during one of those in-between moments, around week 3, I heard my best friends visit, Jake, Matt, and Stephen. We'd been tight since college, did everything together, considered ourselves brothers. When I heard their voices in my hospital room, I felt this surge of relief. They came. They actually showed up. Maybe they'd been visiting regularly, and this was just the first time I was aware enough to hear them. They talked to a nurse first, asked about my condition, how I was doing, when I might wake up. The nurse gave them the standard update, said I was stable, that the doctors were cautiously optimistic. They thanked her, and I waited for them to talk to me, to say something comforting or encouraging, to let me know they were there for me. They spent maybe 5 minutes on that. Then the conversation shifted. Jake said something about how weird it was seeing me like this, all hooked up to machines. Matt agreed, said it was kind of depressing. Then Jake laughed, this casual, easy laugh, and said at least they didn't have to deal with my boring personality for a while. He said it like it was a joke, but nobody corrected him. Stephen laughed too. I wanted to believe I'd misheard, that the medication was messing with my perception. But then Matt kept going. He said I was kind of a drag anyway, always wanting to leave parties early, always being the responsible one who didn't want to do anything fun. He said the friend group had been more fun without me these past few weeks, more relaxed, more spontaneous. Stephen jumped in then. He brought up my girlfriend Rachel, said she was definitely going to upgrade now. He said it like it was inevitable, like there was no way she'd stick around for someone who might come out of this different, damaged, less than what I was before. Jake agreed, said Rachel was too good for me anyway, that this might be her chance to find someone better. They laughed about it, all 3 of them, like my relationship ending would be this funny side effect of me nearly dying. But that wasn't even the worst part. Matt started talking about a party they'd thrown the previous weekend. A big one, apparently, at Jake's place. They'd invited everyone from our friend group, had a great time, stayed up until 4 in the morning. They talked about who hooked up with who, what stupid things people did while drunk, how it was one of the best nights they'd had in months. Then Stephen mentioned they didn't invite Rachel. Jake asked why not, and Stephen said, why depress everyone? He said having her there would have been this constant reminder that I was in the hospital, that it would have killed the vibe. Better to just not invite her and keep the party fun. Matt and Jake agreed, said it was the right call. I was laying there, unable to move, unable to speak, listening to the people I considered my closest friends talk about how much better their lives were without me in it, how I was boring, how my girlfriend would leave me, how they'd actively excluded her from social events because acknowledging my existence would have been inconvenient. They stayed maybe 20 minutes total. Then Jake said they should probably get going, that they'd grab food from the cafeteria on the way out. They left without saying goodbye to me, without touching my hand or saying they hoped I'd recover. They just walked out discussing whether to get burgers or pizza. I drifted back under after that, but their words stayed with me. Every time I surfaced toward consciousness over the next 3 weeks, I replayed that conversation in my head, analyzed every word, every laugh, every casual dismissal of our friendship, and I realized something. Those weren't slips of the tongue or stress-induced comments. That was the truth. That was how they really felt about me, the kind of things they said when they thought I'd never hear them. 3 weeks later, I woke up fully. The doctors were thrilled with my recovery, said I was doing better than they'd expected, that I'd avoided any major complications. Rachel was there, had apparently been visiting every single day, sitting with me, talking to me even when I couldn't respond. She cried when I opened my eyes, told me how scared she'd been, how much she loved me. My parents visited, my sister flew in from across the country. Co-workers sent flowers and cards, but Jake, Matt, and Stephen, they didn't come back after that one visit. I found out later they'd texted Rachel a few times asking for updates, send a group message saying they hoped I was okay, but they never actually showed up again. When I got home 2 weeks later, still weak but recovering, I made a decision. I blocked all three of them. Phone numbers, social media, everything. I didn't send an explanation, didn't leave a message, just cut them out completely. Rachel asked what happened, if we'd had a fight she didn't know about. I told her what I'd heard in the hospital. She went pale, said she couldn't believe they'd say those things. Then she admitted they'd been distant with her too, barely checking in, acting like my illness was this inconvenient thing happening to them. Jake was the first to notice I'd blocked him. He tried calling from different numbers, left voicemails asking what was going on, if he'd done something wrong. I ignored all of it. Matt reached out through a mutual acquaintance, asked if I was mad about something. I told the acquaintance I didn't want to talk to Matt. Stephen just accepted it, didn't even try to reach out. Guess I wasn't worth the effort. Then came the breaking point. About 6 weeks after I got home, Jake managed to get through to me via email. He'd apparently been trying to figure out what happened, why I'd suddenly ghosted our entire friend group. He sent this long message about how confused he was, how worried, how he thought we were brothers and didn't understand why I was shutting him out. I replied with one paragraph. I told him exactly what I'd heard during their hospital visit in week 3, quoted their words back to them, told him I'd been conscious enough to hear every single thing they said about me, about Rachel, about their party. I told him I knew exactly who they were now, and I wanted nothing to do with any of them. He didn't respond. None of them did. I don't know if Jake told Matt and Stephen what I'd heard, or if he kept it to himself. I don't really care. The friendship was over the moment they walked into my hospital room and decided to mock me while I was fighting for my life. Rachel and I are still together, stronger than ever actually. Turns out she wasn't looking to upgrade, she was looking to support her partner through a terrifying medical crisis, which is what actual love looks like. We've built a new social circle together, made friends with people who show up when things get hard, instead of throwing parties to celebrate your absence. I ran into Matt about 3 months ago at a coffee shop. He saw me, went pale, looked like he wanted to say something. I just turned around and walked out. I don't need closure. I don't need apologies. I heard everything I needed to hear in that hospital room. People ask sometimes if I regret cutting them off, if maybe I should have given them a chance to explain or apologize. But explain what? Apologize for what they really think about me? For showing me their true character when they thought there would be no consequences. They didn't make a mistake. They revealed who they actually were. The thing about almost dying is it clarifies things, shows you what actually matters, who actually matters. I wasted years on friendships that were apparently conditional on me being fun enough, interesting enough, convenient enough. I'm not interested in earning people's loyalty anymore. Either you're there when things get hard or you're not. And if you're not, I don't need you when things get easy again. I've built a better friend group now. Smaller, but real. People who checked in on Rachel during my coma, who visited me in the hospital, who showed up with meals and help when I got home. People who didn't throw parties to celebrate my absence or joke about my girlfriend leaving me. People who acted like friends instead of just calling themselves friends. Jake, Matt, and Stephen can keep their fun, spontaneous, drag-free social life. I'll keep my dignity and the people who actually value me. Fair trade. Chris lost friends who showed their real faces, but what happens when your partner doesn't just move on emotionally, but literally moves someone into your home while you're helpless? I'm Zoe, and I'm 29 years old. 4 months ago, I had a spinal injury that changed everything. I was rock climbing, something I'd done dozens of times before, when my harness failed. I fell about 20 feet and landed wrong. The impact compressed 2 vertebrae and left me with limited mobility from the waist down. The doctors said I'd walk again eventually, but it would take time, intensive physical therapy, and a lot of patience. So I settled in for what I knew would be a long recovery. My boyfriend Ethan was there at the hospital when I came out of surgery. He held my hand, told me everything would be okay, promised he'd be there every step of the way. For the first month, he kept that promise. He visited almost daily, brought me books and snacks, updated me on what was happening in our apartment. He seemed supportive, seemed like he understood this was temporary and we'd get through it together. Then the visits started becoming less frequent. Week 5, he came 3 times instead of 6. Week 6, twice. By month 2, he was visiting maybe once a week, always with an excuse about work or errands or being tired. I tried not to read too much into it. Recovery is hard on everyone, I told myself. He's dealing with stress too. I gave him the benefit of the doubt because that's what you do when you love someone. Month 3, I got a text from my neighbor, Mrs. Chen. She's this sweet older woman who lives across the hall and waters my plants when I travel. Her text was short and uncomfortable. She said she didn't want to overstep, but she thought I should know that a woman had moved into my apartment with Ethan. She'd seen her coming and going for the past 2 weeks, carrying in boxes, acting like she lived there. Mrs. Chen said she'd tried to introduce herself, and the woman had called Ethan her boyfriend. I read that text 3 times, trying to make it mean something other than what it obviously meant. Then I texted Ethan, kept it simple, asked who was staying at the apartment. He took 4 hours to respond, which already told me everything I needed to know. When he finally replied, he said it was his cousin Brittany, that she was crashing temporarily because she'd moved to the city for a new job and needed a place to stay while she found her own apartment. Here's the thing, Ethan doesn't have cousins in our state. I know his family. I've met his relatives at holidays and family events. His only cousin named Brittany lives in Oregon and works as a teacher. She's married with 2 kids. This wasn't her. So I asked for details. What's her last name? Where's she working? When's she moving out? He got defensive, said I was being paranoid, that he was doing his family a favor and I was making it weird. I knew right then he was lying, but I needed proof. I couldn't exactly get out of my hospital bed and drive over there to check. So I called my friend Marcus, explained the situation, and asked if he could do me a favor. Marcus went to my apartment building, told the management he was concerned about a welfare check because I'd been hospitalized and couldn't reach my boyfriend. Smart move, because it got them to actually talk to him. The property manager confirmed that a woman named Brittany had been added to the lease 3 weeks ago. Not as a guest, not as a temporary occupant. She'd been added as Ethan's girlfriend, with Ethan signing the paperwork himself. My name was still on the lease too, but Ethan had essentially moved someone else into our shared apartment and formalized it with the building while I was lying in a hospital bed, unable to walk. When Marcus told me, I felt this cold clarity wash over me. Ethan had used my medical situation to rebrand himself as single. He'd moved his new girlfriend into the apartment we shared, told her whatever story made him look good, and was just waiting out my recovery to see how it played out. Maybe he thought I'd never find out. Maybe he thought by the time I came home, he'd have figured out how to explain it. Or maybe he just didn't care. I didn't confront him immediately. I waited. I focused on my physical therapy, on getting stronger, on reaching the point where I could be discharged. The doctors cleared me to go home after 4 months. Earlier than expected because I'd pushed myself hard in rehab. I didn't tell Ethan my discharge date. I didn't give him any warning. The day I was released, my brother drove me home. I'd also arranged for a police escort, told them I was concerned about a domestic situation and needed support while collecting my belongings. The officers were professional and understanding. When we pulled up to the apartment building, I was nervous, but also weirdly calm. I knew exactly what I was walking into. We took the elevator up to the 3rd floor. My brother helped me with my walker. The police followed behind. I knocked on my own apartment door, and Brittany answered. She was wearing my bathrobe, my favorite bathrobe that I'd bought on vacation in California 2 years ago. She looked confused when she saw me, then panicked when she saw the police. I didn't say anything to her. I just walked past her into my own apartment. Ethan was on the couch, clearly having just woken up from a nap. The look on his face when he saw me was priceless. Pure shock, then fear, then this pathetic attempt at a smile like he could charm his way out of this. I told the officers I needed to collect my belongings. They stood by while my brother and I packed everything that was mine. Clothes, books, kitchen items I'd bought, furniture I'd paid for. Brittany tried to say some of it was hers. I pulled out receipts from my phone. I'd kept digital records of everything I'd purchased for that apartment. She stopped arguing pretty quickly. Ethan kept trying to talk to me, saying we should discuss this privately, that I was overreacting, that he could explain everything. I ignored him completely. When we'd packed everything into my brother's truck, I turned to Ethan and told him he had 24 hours to remove my name from the lease, or I'd sue him for fraud and emotional distress. He started to argue. One of the officers cleared his throat. Ethan shut up. Then I did something that felt petty in the moment, but turned out to be the best decision I made. I posted the entire story on Facebook. Every detail. The spinal injury, the hospital stay, the mysterious cousin story, the truth about Brittany being added to the lease while I was paralyzed in a hospital bed. I tagged mutual friends. I didn't tag Ethan directly, but I didn't have to. Within an hour, the post had been shared 15 times. His family saw it. His mother called him, apparently, because one of his cousins commented on my post, saying she was horrified and had already let his mum know what kind of person her son really was. His co-workers saw it. Someone from his office reached out to me privately to say they'd always thought he was sketchy, and this confirmed it. Our friend group saw it, and the group chat I wasn't part of apparently exploded with people taking sides. Most people sided with me. A few tried to say I was airing private business publicly, that I should have handled it privately. I told them I tried handling it privately when I texted him about the woman in our apartment, and he lied to my face. Sometimes public accountability is the only accountability that actually works. That's when everything unraveled for Ethan. His social circle collapsed. Friends stopped inviting him to things, stopped responding to his messages. His family was mortified, and Brittany, once she realized the full story, that Ethan had lied to her about his living situation and his girlfriend in the hospital, left him within 2 weeks. Apparently, she'd thought he was single and had broken up with me months ago. He'd told her I was an ex who'd moved out. When the truth came out, she wanted nothing to do with him. Ethan tried to apologize about a month later, sent me a long email about how he'd made mistakes, how he'd been scared and handled things wrong, how he hoped I could forgive him someday. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. He'd shown me exactly who he was when he thought I was helpless. He'd moved on before I could even walk again. That's not a mistake, that's a choice. I've been in my new apartment for 2 months now. It's smaller, but it's mine. Just mine. I'm still in physical therapy, still rebuilding strength, but I'm walking without assistance now. I've even started climbing again, with proper equipment and supervision, and I've started dating again, very casually, just testing the waters. The experience taught me something important. When someone shows you who they are in a crisis, believe them the first time. Ethan could have been honest. He could have said the distance was too hard, that he couldn't handle my recovery, that he wanted to move on. It would have hurt, but it would have been fair. Instead, he lied, cheated, and tried to gaslight me into thinking I was paranoid for questioning the obvious. The public call-out felt extreme to some people, but I don't regret it. He was counting on me staying quiet, on being too embarrassed or too hurt to tell people what really happened. He was counting on being able to control the narrative. I took that power away from him. I told the truth, loudly and publicly, and let the consequences fall where they should. At least Zoe had the satisfaction of a public call-out, but some betrayals happen so quietly. You only catch them when people speak freely, thinking you'll never hear. I'm Daniel, and I'm 40 years old. 9 weeks ago, I had a stroke. Not a mild one, not the kind where you slur your words for a few hours and then recover with some physical therapy. This was catastrophic. It left me with something called locked-in syndrome, which is exactly as terrifying as it sounds. I was completely paralyzed, unable to move or speak, but fully conscious, fully aware. My mind worked perfectly while my body became a prison I couldn't escape from. The doctors told my family I might never recover. They said even if I did regain some function, I'd likely have severe cognitive impairment. So people started treating me like I was already gone, like I was furniture in the room, something to work around while they went about their business. And they talked. They talked about everything, assuming I couldn't hear them or wouldn't remember even if I could. They were wrong on both counts. Week 2, my business partner Paul came to visit. We'd built our company together over 12 years, a software consulting firm that had grown from just the two of us to 40 employees and 8 million in annual revenue. Paul brought our CFO Martin with him. They pulled chairs up next to my bed and talked about the business. At first it seemed normal. Updates on client projects, staffing issues, the usual operational stuff. Then the conversation shifted. Paul said something about how my stroke was actually an opportunity. An opportunity. Those were his exact words. Martin asked what he meant, and Paul explained that with me out of the picture, they could restructure the ownership agreement. He said I'd been holding the company back anyway, too conservative with growth strategies, too focused on employee retention over profits. He said this was their chance to push me out completely, maybe offer my wife a small settlement and take full control. Martin seemed hesitant at first, asked if that was legal. Paul laughed and said it didn't matter because I'd either die or be too impaired to fight it. Then he brought up the money. He told Martin they'd been skimming from client accounts for 8 months, small amounts that wouldn't trigger audits, routing it through a shell company Paul had set up. He said they had almost $400,000 put away, and with me gone, they could accelerate the process. I was screaming inside, screaming at them to stop, to get out, to know that I could hear every word, but my body wouldn't respond. I just lay there, paralyzed, while my business partner admitted to embezzling from the company we'd built together and planning to steal my ownership stake. They stayed for maybe 20 minutes, worked out some details about the restructuring timeline, and then left. Paul squeezed my shoulder on his way out, told me to hang in there, like he was some concerned friend instead of a thief planning to destroy everything I'd worked for. But that wasn't even the worst part. Week 4, my wife's best friend Amanda came to visit. She and my wife Sarah had been friends since college, 20 years of friendship, standing up in each other's weddings, the whole sisterhood thing. Amanda sat with Sarah at my bedside while Sarah cried about how hard everything was, how scared she was, how she didn't know what to do. And Amanda, this person Sarah trusted completely, started talking. She said she understood how difficult this must be. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. She admitted she'd always been jealous of our marriage. She said she'd tried multiple times over the years to break us up, planting seeds of doubt, making snide comments about me, even lying about seeing me with other women once just to start a fight between us. Sarah was shocked. She asked Amanda what she was talking about, why she would do something like that. Amanda said she couldn't help it, that she'd always thought Sarah deserved better than me, that seeing us happy made her feel inadequate about her own failed relationships. Then she said the quietest part out loud. She was glad I was out of the picture. She hoped Sarah would finally move on and find someone worthy of her. Sarah asked Amanda to leave. There was this long, uncomfortable silence, and then Amanda backtracked, said she didn't mean it like that the stress was making her say things wrong. But Sarah wasn't buying it. She told Amanda to go, that she needed time to process what she'd just heard. Amanda left and Sarah sat there crying for another hour. I wanted to reach out, to hold her, to tell her I'd heard everything and we'd deal with it together, but I couldn't move. Then came the breaking point. Week 6, my brother Jason visited. Jason and I had always had a complicated relationship. He was 3 years younger, and growing up there had been this unspoken competition between us. I'd gone to college, built a successful business, married Sarah. Jason had struggled with jobs, relationships, never quite finding his footing. But I thought we'd moved past that as adults. I thought we were close. Jason came to visit while Sarah was downstairs getting coffee. He sat down next to my bed and just started talking. At first it seemed like he was venting, processing the stress of having a sick brother. Then it turned darker. He said he'd always resented me for being the successful one. He said our parents had always favored me, always held me up as the example he should follow. He said watching me build a life while he struggled had eaten at him for years. Then he said he hoped I'd stay incapacitated. Not die, he clarified, but stay just impaired enough that I couldn't run the business anymore, couldn't be the golden child anymore. He said it would level the playing field, make him feel less like a failure in comparison. He talked about me like I was some obstacle to his own self-worth, like my success was a personal attack on him. When Sarah came back, Jason switched immediately to the concerned brother routine, asked how she was holding up, offered to help with anything she needed. She had no idea what he'd just said, no idea that her brother-in-law had basically admitted he wanted me to stay disabled for his own emotional benefit. I catalogued every conversation, every betrayal, every confession people made thinking I'd never be aware enough to remember. And I held on to them with perfect clarity because that's all I could do. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't defend myself or my wife or my business. All I could do was remember and wait. Week 9, something shifted. I started regaining small movements, a finger twitch, a slight head turn. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, said it was possible I might recover more function than they'd initially thought. By week 10, I could move my right hand. By week 11, I could speak, slowly and with effort, but I could form words. The first thing I did was ask for a lawyer. Not our family lawyer, a new one, someone who specialized in corporate fraud. When he came to the hospital, I told him everything about Paul and Martin, every detail of their conversation, the shell company, the embezzlement timeline. He recorded everything, took notes, and said we had enough for a criminal case. He contacted the FBI. Within 3 weeks, federal agents executed search warrants on Paul's home and office. They found the shell company records, the transferred funds, email communications planning the whole scheme. Paul and Martin were both arrested and charged with wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The case is ongoing, but my lawyer says they're looking at significant prison time. The company is intact, my ownership restored, and we've hired a new CFO who actually has integrity. I told Sarah about Amanda, every word of that conversation. She was devastated but not entirely surprised. She said there had been little things over the years, comments that seemed off, but she'd always dismissed them. She ended the friendship immediately, blocked Amanda's number, and hasn't spoken to her since. Amanda tried to reach out, sent letters apologizing, but Sarah wasn't interested. 20 years of friendship ended because Amanda couldn't handle someone else's happiness. And Jason? I confronted him directly. Once I could speak clearly enough, I asked him to visit. When he showed up, acting concerned and supportive, I told him I'd heard everything he said during week 6. I watched his face go pale. He tried to backtrack immediately, said he'd been stressed, didn't mean it, was just venting. But I cut him off. I told him I didn't want a relationship with him anymore. Not casual contact, not family gatherings, nothing. He'd shown me who he really was, and I believed him. Jason tried to apologize, sent emails and texts for weeks. Our mother got involved, begged me to forgive him, said family was family. But I was done. Some things you can't unhear. Some betrayals you can't forgive. He'd hoped I'd stay disabled so he could feel better about his own life. That's not sibling rivalry. That's something much darker. I lost people through this. Paul, who I'd considered a friend and partner for over a decade. Amanda, who Sarah had trusted completely. Jason, my own brother. But honestly, I gained more than I lost. I gained clarity about who people really are when they think there are no consequences. I gained the knowledge that Sarah, despite everything, stayed loyal and loving even when I couldn't respond. I gained a deep appreciation for the few people who showed up consistently, who talked to me like I was still there, who never gave up hope. I'm still recovering. Physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy. It's slow and frustrating, but I'm getting stronger. And every day I'm grateful I survived to hold these people accountable. Grateful I didn't die or stay locked in while Paul stole my company, while Amanda poisoned my marriage from the inside, while Jason wished for my continued suffering. The stroke didn't kill me, but it killed any illusions I had about certain people in my life. And in a strange way, that's almost a gift. I know exactly who to trust now. I know exactly who deserves a place in my future. Everyone else can live with the consequences of what they said when they thought I'd never hear them. Daniel heard lies in his hospital room, but imagine the fury of waking up to find your boss didn't just speak badly about you, he literally called you replaceable and then tried to erase your career. I'm Simone, and I'm 35 years old. 4 months ago, I was the creative director at a mid-sized marketing agency. I'd worked there for 7 years, built the creative department from 3 people to 15, landed some of the biggest clients in our portfolio. I loved my job. I was good at it. And then I had an accident that put me in the hospital for 12 weeks. I was hit by a drunk driver on my way home from a client dinner. Broke both legs, shattered my pelvis, had internal injuries that required multiple surgeries. The doctors said I was lucky to be alive. I didn't feel lucky. I felt like my entire life had been put on hold while my body tried to remember how to function. The company sent flowers. My CEO, Greg, visited once in the first week. He stayed maybe 10 minutes, said all the right things about taking my time and focusing on recovery, that my job would be waiting when I was ready. I believed him. I'd given 7 years to that agency. I'd generated millions in revenue. Surely they could manage without me for a few months. Week 4, my assistant Maya visited. She's 26, brilliant, the kind of person who anticipates problems before they happen. She brought me magazines and snacks and sat with me for about an hour before she finally worked up the courage to tell me what was really happening at the office. Greg had called an all-hands meeting the week after my accident. He told the entire company that my medical leave was an opportunity to restructure the creative department. He said I was replaceable, that the company couldn't afford to wait around for me to recover, that they needed to move forward. He'd already hired someone new. His nephew Kyle, fresh out of college with a marketing degree and exactly 0 professional experience. Kyle was moving into my office, taking over my team, sitting in on my client meetings. Maya said Greg had told clients I'd moved on to pursue other opportunities. Not that I was recovering from a near-fatal accident. Not that I'd be back in a few months. He told them I'd left, and Kyle was the new creative director. Some clients pushed back, asked to speak with me directly. Greg told them I wasn't available, that Kyle was fully briefed on all their accounts and they were in good hands. I listened to all of this from a hospital bed where I could barely sit up without help. My legs were in casts, I had a dozen pins holding my pelvis together, and my boss was telling people I'd quit. The casual cruelty of it was almost impressive. Maya apologized for not telling me sooner. She said she didn't want to stress me out while I was recovering, but she thought I deserved to know what I was coming back to, if I was coming back at all. She said half the team was looking for other jobs, that morale was terrible, that Kyle was in way over his head and making decisions that were actively losing clients. I thanked her for telling me, asked her to keep me updated on anything important, and then I started planning. I couldn't do much from a hospital bed, but I could think. I could strategize, and I could document everything Maya told me, every update she sent, every piece of evidence that Greg had used my accident as an excuse to push me out and install his unqualified nephew in my place. 3 months after the accident, my doctors cleared me to return to work part-time. I was still using a cane, still in physical therapy 3 days a week, but I could sit at a desk and use a computer. I called Greg, told him I was ready to come back. He sounded surprised, said he was thrilled that they'd missed me, that we should set up a meeting to discuss my transition back. The meeting was in his office. He sat behind his desk looking uncomfortable while I sat across from him with my cane propped against the chair. He said he was so glad I'd recovered, that it was great to have me back. Then he said things had changed in my absence. The company had restructured, Kyle was doing an excellent job as creative director, and they didn't want to disrupt the momentum he'd built. He offered me a demotion, senior designer, a step below where I'd been reporting to Kyle. He framed it as easing back in, giving me time to get back up to speed without the pressure of leadership. He even said it came with a salary adjustment to match the new role, a 20% pay cut. I asked where my office was. He said Kyle was using it now, but there was a desk available in the open floor plan. I asked about my team. He said they reported to Kyle now, that it wouldn't make sense to change that structure when things were running smoothly. I asked about my clients. He said they'd been transitioned to Kyle's oversight. I smiled. I thanked him for the opportunity. I said I'd need a few days to think about it, but I appreciated him making space for me in the new structure. He looked relieved, probably thought I was going to accept the demotion and fade quietly into the background. Instead, I went home and started making calls. Every major client I'd brought to the agency, I reached out personally. I explained what had happened, not in a bitter way, just factually. I'd been in a serious accident, the company had replaced me while I was in the hospital, and I was now starting my own agency. If they were happy with Kyle's work, I completely understood. But if they valued the relationship we'd built over the years and wanted to continue working with me, I'd love to have them. 8 out of our top 10 clients said yes immediately. They'd been frustrated with Kyle, missed the level of creativity and strategy I'd brought, and were relieved to have the option to work with me directly. 2 more said they'd think about it and ended up switching within a month. I quit the agency 2 weeks after Greg's demotion offer. Didn't give notice, didn't offer to train anyone. Just sent a resignation email and walked out. Started my own agency the same day with the clients who'd agreed to follow me. Greg called me 6 hours after I sent the resignation. He was furious, accused me of poaching clients, threatened legal action, said I'd violated my non-compete agreement. I calmly reminded him that my non-compete specified I couldn't solicit clients while employed by the agency. I was no longer employed, and the clients had contacted me just as much as I'd contacted them. If he wanted to sue, I'd be happy to discuss in court how he'd told clients I'd left the company while I was unconscious in a hospital bed. He hung up. Within 6 months, Greg's agency had lost 60% of its revenue. The clients I'd taken represented most of their high-value accounts, and Kyle wasn't landing new business to replace them. The team I'd built started leaving, unwilling to work under someone who'd been promoted purely through nepotism. The board started asking questions about the financial decline. Greg was forced out 8 months after I left. The board wanted a scapegoat for the revenue loss, and he was the obvious choice. Kyle went back to entry-level work at a different agency. Last I heard, he's doing graphic design for corporate newsletters. My agency is doing well. Better than well, actually. We hit $1 million in revenue in our first year. I hired most of my old team, everyone except the ones who'd sided with Greg during the transition, who'd made Kyle's takeover easier by not pushing back. I wanted people who had integrity, who understood loyalty, who wouldn't fold the second things got difficult. Maya is my operations director now. She's the one who warned me what was happening, who kept me informed when she could have just kept her head down and protected her own job. She's also the one who told me which team members had actively helped Kyle, who'd been complicit in the restructuring. I appreciated the honesty. People ask sometimes if I feel bad about what happened to Greg's agency, about the people who lost their jobs when the company downsized after losing all that revenue. Honestly, no. Greg made a calculated decision to replace me while I was fighting to recover from a life-threatening accident. He didn't do it because he thought Kyle was more talented or because the company needed fresh leadership. He did it because I was vulnerable and he saw an opportunity to put his nephew in a position he hadn't earned. He gambled that I wouldn't come back, or that if I did, I'd be too grateful to have a job at all to fight for what I'd built. He was wrong on both counts. The board that forced him out did so because he'd made catastrophically bad business decisions that cost the company millions. That's on him. The employees who lost their jobs lost them because Greg prioritized nepotism over competence, and the company couldn't sustain itself without the clients I'd brought in. Also on him. I built something once, and when someone tried to take it from me, I built something better, and this time, I own it. Nobody can walk into my office and hand it to their unqualified nephew. Nobody can tell my clients I've moved on while I'm lying in a hospital bed. Nobody can use my vulnerability as an excuse to diminish what I've accomplished. Greg labeled me replaceable. Turned out he was the one who couldn't be replaced. And Kyle? Kyle was never qualified to replace anyone. He was just a placeholder in a scheme that fell apart the second I was strong enough to fight back. I still use a cane sometimes when my hip acts up or I've been on my feet too long. It reminds me of what I survived, both the accident and the betrayal that followed. And every time I walk into my office, my actual office in my own agency, I think about Greg's face when he realized I wasn't going to quietly accept being pushed aside. That look of surprise when the person he'd written off came back stronger than he'd ever expected. Simone rebuilt her career, but not everyone gets that chance, especially when your family makes permanent decisions about your life without your consent. I'm Lucas, and I'm 37 years old. 13 weeks ago, I had a traumatic accident that put me in a coma. I was helping a friend move furniture when a shelving unit collapsed, and I took the full weight of it to my head and upper body. The doctors told my family the first 72 hours were critical, that they'd know more once the swelling in my brain went down, but there were no guarantees about if or when I'd wake up, or what condition I'd be in if I did. My parents flew in immediately. My sister drove up from 2 states away. They camped out at the hospital those first few days, talking to doctors, making medical decisions, doing what family is supposed to do during a crisis. I don't fault them for that part. What came after, though, that's a different story. Week 2, my condition stabilized, but I still wasn't conscious. The doctors said I could be out for weeks, possibly months, and they couldn't predict my cognitive state upon waking. That uncertainty, that lack of a clear timeline, apparently gave my family permission to start making decisions about my life. Decisions they justified as being for my own good. They started with my car. I had a 3-year-old sedan, paid off, nothing fancy but reliable and mine. My brother-in-law had been eyeing it for months, always commenting on what good condition it was in. Week 3 of my coma, my parents sold it to him. For half what it was worth, they told themselves they were helping him out, giving him a good deal, and I wouldn't need it anyway because I probably wouldn't be able to drive after this kind of head trauma. Then they broke my apartment lease. I'd been renting a 1-bedroom in a decent neighborhood for 4 years, had a good relationship with my landlord, always paid on time. My lease wasn't up for another 7 months, but my parents called the landlord and explained the situation. They said I was permanently disabled, wouldn't be returning, and they needed to terminate the lease immediately. The landlord was sympathetic but firm. Breaking the lease would cost my security deposit, plus 2 months' rent as penalty. My parents agreed on my behalf and paid it out of my bank account. They moved all my belongings into a storage unit. Furniture, clothes, kitchen stuff, everything I'd accumulated over a decade of independent living got boxed up and shoved into a 10 by 10 space across town. They kept paying the monthly fee out of my account, which they had access to because of an old joint account arrangement from when I was in college that we'd never bothered to close. But that wasn't even the worst part. Week 5, my sister contacted my employer. I worked as a project manager for a mid-sized tech company, had been there for 6 years, good performance reviews, solid relationships with my team. My sister called HR and told them I was permanently disabled and wouldn't be returning to work. She didn't consult with doctors about my prognosis. She didn't wait to see if I'd wake up. She just made the call, said I was done, and suggested they start looking for my replacement. My employer, to their credit, asked for medical documentation. My sister told them the doctors couldn't provide a timeline, that brain injuries were unpredictable, that it could be years before I'd be functional again, if ever. HR placed me on extended medical leave but started the process of filling my position, figuring it was the practical thing to do given the circumstances. All of this happened while I was unconscious. I had no say, no input, no ability to advocate for myself. My family made every major decision about my life based on the assumption that I'd never wake up, or if I did, I'd be too impaired to live independently. They dismantled my entire existence and convinced themselves they were being helpful. I woke up in week 13, cognitively intact, memory functioning, able to speak and reason and understand what was happening around me. The doctors were thrilled. My recovery was ahead of schedule, my brain scans looked good, and while I'd need physical therapy for some coordination issues, my mental capacity was unaffected. I was going to be fine. My family was overjoyed. My mum cried. My dad kept saying it was a miracle. My sister hugged me and told me how worried she'd been. Then they started telling me about everything they'd handled while I was out, and they framed it like they were heroes. We took care of everything so you wouldn't have to stress when you woke up. We made all the hard decisions. We handled your affairs. You can just focus on recovery now. I asked about my apartment. My mum explained they'd broken the lease because it was too expensive, and I'd be staying with them during recovery anyway. I asked about my car. My dad said they'd sold it to my brother-in-law because I wouldn't be driving for a while, and it made sense to keep it in the family. I asked about my job. My sister said she'd let them know I was disabled so they wouldn't be waiting around, that I could look for something new once I was better. I didn't say anything in that moment. I was still weak, still processing, still trying to understand the full scope of what they'd done. But over the next few days, as I got stronger and started asking more detailed questions, the reality became clear. They'd sold my car for half its value. They'd cost me my security deposit and paid penalties to break my lease. They'd told my employer I was permanently disabled without any medical basis for that claim. And they'd done it all without my consent, without waiting to see if I'd recover, without considering that I might wake up and want my life back. Then I found out about the money. I asked to see my bank statements, told my mom I wanted to check my account balance and make sure bills were being paid. She hesitated, said she'd been handling everything and I didn't need to worry about it. That hesitation told me everything. I insisted. She finally pulled up my account on her phone. $12,000 was missing. $12,000 that had been there before my accident. Gone. I asked where it went. My mum said they'd borrowed it for medical expenses. That insurance didn't cover everything, that they'd needed it to pay for my care. I asked for receipts, for documentation of what they'd spent it on. She got defensive, said I was being ungrateful, that they'd been taking care of me for 3 months, and this was how I thanked them. I called the hospital billing department from my room, asked for an itemization of all charges related to my stay. The billing specialist was helpful, pulled up my account and confirmed that my insurance had covered everything except a small copay that had already been paid. There were no outstanding medical expenses, no bills my parents needed to cover. They'd taken $12,000 from my account and spent it on something else, then lied about it being for my medical care. I asked my parents directly what they'd used the money for. My dad admitted they'd had some financial difficulties, some credit card debt that was getting out of hand, and they'd borrowed from my account planning to pay it back once I recovered. Borrowed. Like taking money from an unconscious person's bank account without permission is borrowing. I was discharged 2 weeks later, physically stable enough to leave the hospital, but nowhere near emotionally okay with what had happened. My parents assumed I'd be coming home with them, staying in their guest room while I finished recovery. I told them I'd be making other arrangements. They looked hurt, confused, like they couldn't understand why I wasn't grateful for everything they'd done. I contacted a lawyer the day after I was discharged, explained the entire situation: the car sold without my consent, the lease broken without my permission, the job I lost because of false information my sister provided, and the $12,000 taken from my account. The lawyer said I had a strong case for financial exploitation and potentially fraud, depending on how the banking situation was structured. We filed suit against my parents for the stolen money and demanded a full accounting of every financial decision they'd made on my behalf. We also sent a cease and desist letter ordering them to stop accessing my bank account and to provide documentation of where my belongings were stored. My parents were shocked. They couldn't believe I was suing them. My mum cried on my voicemail, said they'd only been trying to help, that I was being cruel and ungrateful. But here's the thing: help requires consent. Help requires asking the person what they need and respecting their autonomy. What they did wasn't help, it was control. They made decisions that benefited them. My brother-in-law got a cheap car. They paid off their credit cards. My sister didn't have to deal with the uncertainty of my job situation, and then they framed it all as selfless caregiving. The court case took 6 months. My parents tried to argue they'd acted in good faith, that they'd made reasonable decisions given the circumstances. But the evidence was clear. They'd sold my car below market value to a family member. They'd accessed my bank account and taken money for personal expenses while lying about medical bills. They'd given false information to my employer that cost me my job. The judge wasn't sympathetic. I was awarded the full $12,000 plus interest and legal fees. The judge also ordered them to provide a detailed accounting of all other financial transactions, including the car sale and the lease termination. Turns out they'd pocketed the money from selling my car instead of putting it aside for me. Just added it to their household account and spent it. I got most of my money back, but I lost my job permanently. By the time I was healthy enough to reach out to my former employer, they'd already filled my position and didn't have another opening at my level. I lost my apartment, my car, and 3 months of my life, and I lost my family by choice this time. I haven't spoken to my parents or my sister in over a year. They've tried to reach out, sent emails and letters saying they miss me, that family should forgive each other, that they made mistakes but meant well. I don't respond. Meaning well doesn't excuse taking someone's autonomy. Meaning well doesn't justify stealing their money and dismantling their life while they're unconscious. I started over completely alone, found a new apartment, bought a used car, got a new job at a different company. It's been hard, rebuilding from nothing, but at least everything I have now is actually mine. Nobody can sell my car, or break my lease, or make decisions about my employment without my permission. I have control, and after everything that happened, that matters more than having family who thinks love means taking over your life when you're vulnerable. The hardest part isn't the financial recovery or even the career setback. It's knowing that the people who were supposed to protect me saw my accident as an opportunity to solve their money problems, to get my brother-in-law a cheap car, to avoid the inconvenience of uncertainty. They didn't wait to see if I'd recover. They didn't preserve my life for me to come back to. They just carved it up and divided the pieces among themselves, and then expected gratitude when I woke up to nothing. I'm doing okay now, better than okay actually. I've built a life that's completely mine, surrounded myself with people who respect boundaries, who ask before making decisions that affect me. And I've made peace with the fact that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who claim they're helping. Sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to walk away, even when it's from family, especially when it's from family. Lucas had to start over, but at least he woke up to find out. Unlike the person whose family actually changed their will while they lay unconscious. I'm Patricia, 52 years old, and I've been an estate attorney for 26 years. I've spent my entire career helping people protect their assets, navigate family disputes, and ensure their wishes are honored after they're gone. The irony of what happened to me isn't lost on anyone, least of all me. 10 weeks ago, I had a sudden brain hemorrhage. I was in my office reviewing a client's trust documents when I felt the worst headache of my life, and then nothing. I woke up in a hospital bed with no memory of the ambulance, the emergency surgery, or the first week of my hospital stay. The doctors said I was lucky to be alive, that the hemorrhage could have easily killed me. Instead, it left me in a coma for 10 weeks. My ex-husband is named Gregory. We divorced 2 years ago after 25 years of marriage. It wasn't a dramatic split, no cheating or major betrayal, just two people who'd grown apart and wanted different things. We stayed civil for our adult children, Melissa and Josh. They were 23 and 21, old enough to understand that divorce doesn't mean the end of a family, just a restructuring of it. Gregory and I remained on speaking terms. We'd have coffee occasionally, coordinate holiday schedules, act like reasonable adults. I thought we were past any animosity. I was wrong. My current will, the one I drafted as an estate attorney who knows exactly how these things should be done, left the bulk of my estate to various charities, environmental organizations, literacy programs, medical research, causes I cared about. My children were provided for through educational trusts that would cover any graduate school expenses and a modest inheritance that would give them a foundation without making them dependent on my money. It was fair, thoughtful, and exactly what I wanted. Gregory had always hated that will. Even after the divorce, he'd made comments about how the kids deserved more, how I was being selfish leaving money to strangers instead of family. I'd ignored him. It was my estate, my decision, and frankly none of his business anymore. During my coma, Gregory apparently decided to take matters into his own hands. He somehow obtained power of attorney through forged documents. I still don't know all the details of how he managed it, but he convinced a hospital administrator that we'd reconciled, that we were handling my affairs jointly, and that I'd signed papers before the hemorrhage giving him authority. All lies, but convincing enough that someone believed him. Then he hired a lawyer. Not a reputable one, not someone from my firm or anyone I'd ever worked with. A man named Donald Kern, who had a small practice in a strip mall and apparently very flexible ethics. Gregory and Donald worked together to draft a new will. This version left Gregory 40% of my estate, 40%. My ex-husband, who I'd divorced, who had no legal claim to my assets, was planning to take nearly half of everything I'd worked for my entire life. The children's trusts were reduced significantly. Gregory told them this was necessary because the original will was unfair, that I'd been influenced by my new social circle and had forgotten what family meant. Melissa and Josh, my own children, went along with it. They didn't question why their mother, an estate attorney, would suddenly have a change of heart while unconscious. They just saw dollar signs and nodded along. Week 7, I was still unconscious but occasionally aware. That strange in-between state where you can hear things but can't respond, can't move, can't let anyone know you're listening. Gregory came to visit with Melissa, Josh, and Donald the lawyer. They pulled chairs around my bed and had a meeting, an actual planning meeting about my estate while I lay there 3 feet away. Donald had a draft of the new will. He read sections of it out loud, asked if everyone was comfortable with the distribution. Gregory said it was perfect, that this was what I would have wanted if I'd been thinking clearly. Melissa asked when they could finalize it. Donald said they needed to wait until I either woke up, which he said was looking unlikely, or until the doctors declared me permanently incapacitated. Then they could proceed with having me declared incompetent and execute the new will with Gregory's power of attorney. Josh asked what would happen if I woke up. Gregory laughed and said that was a big if, and even if I did, I'd likely have severe brain damage and wouldn't be able to challenge anything. Donald agreed, said cognitive impairment would work in their favor legally. They were planning my entire future, dividing my assets, assuming I'd either die or be too damaged to fight back. And they were doing it in my hospital room next to my bed, while I could hear every word. The sheer audacity of it shocked me in a way medical intervention never could. I became hyper-focused on waking up, on regaining control, on stopping them before they could execute whatever plan they'd concocted. And somehow, whether through pure rage or just timing, I started improving. Small movements at first, finger twitches, eye movements, then more. Within 2 weeks of that meeting, I could speak, slowly and with effort, but I could communicate. The first thing I did was ask for my law firm. Not Gregory, not my kids, my law firm. The senior partner, Michael, came to the hospital within hours. I told him everything. About the forged power of attorney, about the new will, about Gregory and Donald Kern planning to steal my estate. Michael's face went from concern to furious in about 30 seconds. He immediately contacted the State Bar Association and filed a complaint against Donald Kern. He also contacted the police. Forgery, fraud, exploitation of an incapacitated person, the charges started piling up. Michael brought in investigators who examined the power of attorney documents Gregory had used. They were obvious forgeries to anyone who actually looked. My signature was wrong, the notary stamp was fake. The whole thing fell apart under basic scrutiny. Gregory tried to claim it was a misunderstanding, that he'd been trying to help, that the hospital had told him he needed power of attorney to make medical decisions, except he'd used it to hire a lawyer and draft a new will, not to make medical choices. His story didn't hold up. Donald Kern tried to throw Gregory under the bus, said he'd been misled, that he didn't know the power of attorney was forged, but investigators found emails between them discussing the forgery, planning the timeline, coordinating the story. Donald was disbarred within 3 months. His law license, his practice, his entire career gone. Gregory is currently facing criminal fraud charges. The trial is scheduled for next year, but his lawyer has already indicated they're looking at a plea deal. He's looking at prison time, restitution, and a permanent criminal record, all because he got greedy and thought I'd never wake up to stop him. And my children, Melissa and Josh, who participated willingly in this scheme, who sat in my hospital room discussing how to divide my assets while I fought for my life. I've cut them out of my will entirely. Not completely, because that would give them grounds to contest it. I left them each exactly $1. In estate law, that's how you make it clear the exclusion was intentional. Not an oversight. The rest of my estate, every penny, goes to the charities I originally chose. Environmental organizations, literacy programs, medical research. The causes that actually matter to me, not the family members who saw me as nothing more than a bank account to raid. I had my law firm draft a new will while I was still in the hospital. Michael brought in 3 witnesses, a notary, and a videographer to document my mental competency and voluntary signing. That will is ironclad. I included a detailed explanation of why Melissa and Josh are excluded, citing their participation in the fraud scheme. If they try to contest it, that explanation becomes part of the public record. I've also set up multiple legal safeguards, a trust that kicks in if I'm ever incapacitated again, with trustees who have no connection to my family. Updated advance directives that specify exactly who can and cannot make decisions on my behalf. Security measures with my bank and investment accounts requiring multiple forms of verification for any major changes. Gregory thought he could exploit a medical crisis to enrich himself. Donald Kern thought he could profit off a vulnerable client. My children thought they could cash in on their mother's incapacitation without consequences. They all underestimated one critical thing. I'm an estate attorney. I know every trick, every loophole, every way people try to manipulate the system, and I know exactly how to protect against it. I'm alive, I'm recovered, and I'm vindictive in the most legal, most thoroughly documented way possible. My will is ironclad. My assets are protected. And the people who tried to steal from me are facing exactly the consequences they deserve. The brain hemorrhage nearly killed me, but surviving it gave me something valuable. Absolute clarity about who deserves my trust, my money, and my legacy. And it's not the people who share my DNA or my last name. It's the organizations doing real good in the world, the causes that will use my resources to actually help people. Gregory, Donald, Melissa, and Josh can live with the consequences of their choices. I'll live with the satisfaction of knowing I stopped them, held them accountable, and made absolutely sure my wishes will be honored no matter what. And that's where we'll end tonight's collection of stories, with Patricia, who not only survived but made absolutely sure her wishes would be honored, no matter what. If you've made it this far into the chaos, thank you for being here. These stories remind us that when people think we can't hear, can't see, or can't fight back, they often reveal who they truly are. And sometimes the strongest thing we can do is simply survive long enough to set things right. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, the people who truly love you will fight for you even when you can't fight for yourself. Everyone else? Well, they reveal themselves eventually. See you in the next one.